Hello everyone, I am Sleepy Shoreline and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to sleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now relax and unwind. I had just turned 19 and was staying at home from college for the next few months for summer break. My mom lives in the city in the same house I grew up in, but my dad moved into a small home outside the city. It was backed up to the woods, and I always felt so relaxed while I was there. Just being away from everything felt very freeing. Anyway, over the course of the summer, I got the idea to go camping for just a night somewhere in the woods behind my dad's house. I had all the gear already, and I'd gone camping before, so it just seemed like a harmless fun night. I didn't plan on going far out, maybe just walking for a half hour, then finding a good spot to set up, so I left about 2 hours till sunset. I walked with no music or anything, just soaking in the environment and sounds of nature, until I made it far enough out to start setting up my gear. I pitched my tent and got a fire going, then relaxed as the sun set and the woods fell quiet. A couple hours into the night, I went to bed. I had planned to leave in the morning, but when I woke up, I felt like hanging out for a little bit longer. I went for a casual walk and sat by the tent. Surprisingly, the day felt to have gone by really fast. Before I knew it, the sun was making its way down. I packed up my things and cleaned up, then started walking back home. I walked between the trees, having a conversation with myself in my head to pass the time. But as the sun started getting lower and lower, I realized it had been a while since I'd laughed. I stopped and lifted my head, looking around. I didn't really recognize the area. Obviously, there was no path, so I could have just been walking in a slightly different direction. But something seemed wrong. After an entire minute of looking around though, I honestly had no clue which way to go. If I had been going in the right direction, I should have been home already, or at least to the road that my dad's house was on. Racing the sun though, I decided to just continue in the direction I was going, hoping that at some point I'd reach a road. As I walked, the woods got darker and darker, sending me into somewhat of a nervous breakdown. I was looking everywhere for anything to tell me where to go, but now the woods were too dark to even see anything further than 30 or 40 feet. But then I saw a light flickering in the distance. I got excited, walking quickly toward it, until I could make out a dark house sitting in the middle of the trees. I thought it was maybe one of my dad's neighbors, or that it would at least lead me to a road that I could walk along. But as I approached the opening in the woods, I didn't see anything. No roads, no light from other houses, and not even a gravel driveway. The house was old-looking too, resembling more of a cabin, but there was a light in the downstairs window that was on, so it definitely wasn't vacant. I walked around to the other side of it, staying in the tree line still, but there were no signs of any roads or houses on either side. Regrettably, I decided my only option was to ask whoever lived there for help. I walked up to the front door, listening for a second before ringing the doorbell. Immediately, I heard footsteps running down some stairs and right up to the other side. Knowing they were probably looking at me through the peephole, I called out to them. "Hi, sorry, I'm just lost. I was hoping you could tell me which direction the nearest street is." There was a pause, then they opened the door. Two men stood there, both looking to be in their 40s and appearing kind of disheveled. One of them took a step forward and looked outside behind me at the tree line, as if looking for anyone else. There was a moment where both of them were quiet. "Come inside, we'll help you out," one of the men said, opening the door wider and stepping aside. "I'm okay, I just need you to point me in the right direction, please," I said, not wanting to go in some random house in the woods, and also not really seeing the point to it. Both men frowned. Then one spoke, saying he just wanted to talk about why I was out here. I told them I was just camping and got lost, but they looked at each other like I was lying. Then one of them stepped out and stood pretty close to me as he looked around at the trees more intently. When he stepped out, though, he revealed the room behind him, which only had a small lamp in the middle of the floor, surrounded by nothing but dust. I took a step away from the man, and both of them suddenly turned cold. Their facial expressions and body language just became empty as they stood there in silence before the one lunged at me, trying to tackle me to the ground. Luckily, I reacted quick enough to slip away before the other man got to me. I sprinted for the trees, hearing one of the men's footsteps coming up behind me. Once I made it into the woods, the man gave up the chase, and soon after, the lights from the house shut off. Hours passed before I made it to a road, finding out I'd hiked miles in the wrong direction. I told my dad about the encounter, though, and he took it to the police to investigate. We were terrified to hear that the house I wandered into was an old vacation cabin that was abandoned decades ago. Whoever those men were likely used a generator to power the lights and whatever else they were doing. Why they were there, nobody knows. The way they were acting, though, seemed like they were trying to not get caught. So if they had succeeded in getting me into their house, I'm not sure if I ever would have gotten out. A year ago in early winter, I went hiking for a weekend in a national park not far from home. It was supposed to be the last few days of good weather before the winter cold and snow came in, so I wanted to get out while I still could. There was a trail my buddy had told me about that went up to a nice view of a lake and wasn't crowded, so I decided to try it out. But when I got to the trail, it wasn't what I expected. There were no signs or markings. There was just a thin path going through some trees. I walked down a little ways, and while it still had no markings, it seemed like a straightforward trail to hike along. As I walked, it was clear that few people came this way. There were almost no shoe prints in the dirt, and the path didn't seem professionally made. This didn't frighten me or anything, but it was just something I took note of. The forest along the path was really nice, though, full of wildlife and falling leaves from the changing season. About a mile in, I walked past something interesting. Another path leading off into the woods. I stayed on the trail, but I didn't really understand why there would be another path connecting to this already rarely used path. As I kept on walking, though, more of these side trails started to show up. They went off in random directions, leading to what looked like nothing in particular. It was really odd. And then, after about 3 hours of walking, the trail I was on ended. Just like that, there was no more path to follow. All that was ahead was an endless row of trees and forest. And then out of nowhere, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see a guy walking in the distance. He had a ripped-up jacket on and no backpack. And strangely, he was walking across the trail I was on, onto one of the side paths. It didn't look like he saw me. He was just looking down and walking. The way he walked, though, and how he looked, made me a bit creeped out, so I made sure to not be seen as I watched him walk into the woods. By then, it looked like there wasn't much daylight left, and I decided to just abandon finding the lake and just hike back to my car. However, It only took me a few minutes to reach an intersection of paths that I didn't remember before. Immediately, I thought about how the one path ended so abruptly, and how that probably meant that at some point I went onto the wrong trail. I looked down, trying to see if there were any shoe prints of mine that I could follow, but I didn't see any. Then I heard it again. Footsteps behind me. I turned and looked out into the forest. In the distance, that same man was standing and facing me. He didn't move or say anything. He just stood there as if he were watching me. After a moment, a chill ran through my body, and I turned to take whatever trail was in the opposite direction of the man. I quickly hurried, checking behind me multiple times, but after a few minutes, I'd lost track of the man. I went down this trail for over an hour, still worried about both being lost and the strange man. After a while of walking, I moved off the path and leaned against a tree, taking a break to drink some water, and not even a minute passed before I heard those same footsteps. I stayed where I was, behind the tree, as the sound of their shuffling steps got louder and louder, until the man walked right past the tree I was behind. He looked focused on the path ahead, like he thought I was still walking, but there was no doubt in my mind that he was following me, or at least trying to. Once he was gone, I took the opportunity to run back the way I came, getting to the intersection and choosing between two other paths that were in the right direction. Thankfully, I'd made the right choice, because halfway back to my car, all I had was the dim moonlight to guide me through the woods. All I can say is that that man I saw didn't look like he was out there just for a hike, and based on the way he was acting, I think he had some terrible intentions that I may have just barely avoided. I was driving back to my hometown from a work trip I had earlier in the week. I declined the free flight to and from because I decided to take some time off to myself while I was there to enjoy a small vacation. Driving long distance wasn't something I'd ever really done before, though. The most I'd gone was about 10 hours, and that was with the stop at a hotel halfway. But this road trip was way longer. It was nearly 20 hours, and I had only scheduled a single hotel. But just because I'd never driven that long before, didn't make me think I couldn't do it. The drive started out okay, going through cities and towns, and having plenty of other cars around me, seemingly taking the same routes. As I got further out, though, cars became a lot less common, and the towns had pretty much disappeared. The roads were nothing but fields of grass on either side, or dense forests. By 5 p.m., the light drizzling that had started earlier became more intense, pouring rain down hard enough to make it difficult to see. It seemed like the more I drove into this forested area, the harder the rain fell. I'd hoped it would stop by sunset, but it didn't. I was now really focused on the road, driving really slow and trying to make sure I navigated the road carefully without sliding into a ditch. I drove through this awful rain for probably an entire hour past sunset when I started to realize the road was getting a lot more winding rather than straight. It began taking me much deeper into the forest, where the trees were close together and blocking all views. After a while, I started getting nervous, thinking this was really odd for a highway to be like this. I slowed down and pulled off to the side of the road, stopping on the shoulder. I took my phone out and tried searching up the directions, but there was no service. All I'd remembered of the route was that I had to take the same highway pretty much the entire way there. Maybe I was on the right road and was just paranoid, or maybe I've been focusing so hard on trying to see through the rain that I'd accidentally merged onto a different road. The problem is that I had no way to figure out which of those two possibilities was right. I looked out the windows in hopes I'd see a sign or anything that could give me an idea of where I was. All I could see through the harsh rain were the woods all around me, fading into total black beyond my headlights. But then, only a minute or so after I had stopped there, a light came up behind me. I looked in the mirror as it got brighter, rounding one of the corners and coming toward my car. Their headlights were so bright, I couldn't even see their car though. All I could see was the beaming glare in my mirrors. I watched as the light started moving slower and slower until it stopped right behind my car. Part of me felt relieved that someone stopped to help me, but another part of me was thinking of the other possibilities. A whole minute passed as the car stayed there, leaving their headlights on and showing no signs of anything, until a door suddenly opened. It was still too bright to see much of anything, but the dark outline of a man emerged from the light and came right up to my window. The man was wearing a dark hoodie and seemed unbothered by the rain as he leaned on the door while I rolled the window down a couple inches. He asked if I needed help, and I responded by explaining that I just needed to know where I was and if I was still on the right highway. He looked at me, then at my back seat, as he nodded. "Yeah, I can help you. Let me just get my phone." He began walking off as I rolled my window back up to block out the rain. There was something off about my interaction with him, but I couldn't figure out what it was. It just felt off. Why didn't he know what road we were on, or if we were on the highway? I watched in the mirrors until the man went behind the glaring lights again, but I could see him shuffling around with something in his car for a few moments before he came back out. He made his way over, but in the moments before he reached my car, I caught a glimpse of something in his hand. Just as I reacted and put the car in drive, the man suddenly knelt down by my back tire and jammed something in it. I slammed on the gas, seeing the man get visibly startled and jump back as I drove away as fast as I could. I knew he'd probably try to catch up, so I drove in a panic for several minutes, fearing the thought of seeing the lights come up behind me. Luckily though, they never did. I made it about 3 miles before I finally happened upon an intersection with a sign for a gas station up ahead. When I pulled in, I of course called the police, but I also found that the man had stabbed my tire with a screwdriver that was still wedged into the side of the tire, hanging partially out. That still being in there and covering the hole is probably the only reason I was able to make it away without breaking down on the road. If I had been even a second too late at driving away, I don't think I would have ever been seen after that night. When I was a kid, between the ages of 14 to 16, me and my friends were really into hanging out anywhere other than our houses. Most of the time, we would go to some fast food place and chill there, or just find some spot in the woods near the park. I guess we were at that age where we wanted to be alone and not have people looking over our shoulders all the time. The only problem with this was that on the weekends, when we'd be out late, most stores and dining areas closed before we were ready to call it a night. During winter break one year, we ran into this problem a lot. We'd go to the parks to hang out, only to find that even in the late hours of the night, there would be multiple other groups that had the same idea. Then one night, my friend JT brought up his parents' old farmhouse, saying it could be a cool spot to explore and that nobody else would be there. He'd mentioned it a few times before this, but we never thought much of it until that night. JT drove me and my other friend, Paul, out into what looked like the middle of nowhere, arriving at a wooden fence. The fence was closed off with a chain, since it was a private property, and JT didn't have the key to it, so he parked and hopped over it. From the edge of the wooden fence, though, the first thing I realized was that I couldn't see the farmhouse. Yeah, it was dark out and there were no lights anywhere, but I couldn't even make out the shape of the house in any direction. JT started walking, leading the way on a rough gravel path, as he explained why his parents even had the place to begin with. He said it was his grandparents' farmhouse, but when they died, they passed it down to his parents. Apparently it was in horrible condition, and his parents didn't know what to do with it, so they just kept it. That was almost 10 years ago. Nobody had done any maintenance or even checked up on it in over a decade. We walked down this path, following JT for a good 10 minutes before we could finally see the house. Even from just the outline of it in the dark, you could tell it was in bad shape. Part of the roof was dipping inward like it was about to collapse, and some of the siding panels were hanging from the wood. All of us were quiet now, just looking at it as we walked closer. When we got up to the front of the house, the door was covered by a large sheet of wood, so we went around to the back where the door was completely missing. We each turned on our phone flashlights and stepped inside. Surprisingly, the place wasn't really trashed like we thought it'd be. Most of the furniture and stuff didn't seem to have been moved very much. It was extremely dusty though, and our phone lights were not the best, so maybe it just looked better than it was. We split up after a minute, just walking around the first floor and looking. I entered a hallway on the left side of the house and began walking down, when suddenly someone walked past the end of the hallway. I froze, and out of panic, I called out JT as if it was maybe him. But I already knew it wasn't. The man I saw, although it was dark, was much taller and thinner than either of my friends. I stepped back and started to go where I'd last seen the two of them. When I turned around the corner and held up my light, both JT and Paul were standing in the middle of the room, looking away from me. I stepped into the room and looked where their lights were pointing. At the edge of the light, the man was standing and staring right back at them. It was like they were all frozen in fear, unsure of what to make of the situation. "Guys, let's just leave," I said shakily, but trying to act calm so the guy didn't do anything. But that must have triggered everyone's reactions, because suddenly we were all sprinting to the back door and running out into the open field. I can't even say for sure if the man chased us out, but JT says he was confident he heard footsteps right behind him. We pretty much ran straight back to the car and drove off, not taking any more risks. I think we can all assume that the man was just a squatter or homeless person, defending the place he calls home. But without a good look at him, it's hard to say for sure. JT said he'd tell his parents about it, so they could lock down the farmhouse. But he never went through with it because he was worried about getting in trouble for going there. Whatever happened that night remains the most horrifying experience I've had. And if JT was right, and the man was trying to chase us, then we got really lucky to have all gotten out unharmed. My neighborhood growing up wasn't the nicest. Everyone who lived there was there because they couldn't afford anywhere else, not because they wanted to live there. A lot of the houses were extremely small and old, and even the businesses in the town had trouble staying open for more than a year or two. When I was young, it was pretty common for us to go to these houses and businesses that had been abandoned and just mess around in them. The police had to have known this was going on, since every kid in town was doing it, but they didn't do anything about it. Anyway, when I was really young, my elementary school shut down, and the building was never repurposed. So when I was older and exploring these rundown places, I was intrigued to see what the school looked like now. On a Saturday night, my buddy Ryan and I went to the school. We didn't have cars, so we had to walk about 4 miles from his house to get there. This building, even before it was abandoned, I always found a little bit creepy. It was on the edge of town, buried in the woods with a chain link fence around it. It just really did not seem like a place for an elementary school. We climbed over and went to the side of the building to see if there was a window to get in from. Lucky for us, almost every window had already been smashed open. I jumped in first, followed by Ryan. The first thing we did was just stand there and listen to hear if anyone else was inside. There was this very loud, hollow creaking noise the building was making, but it sounded like we were alone. We walked down the hallway, peeking into some of the rooms. It was a very strange feeling to be back at the school after so many years and see it in such horrible condition. We passed maybe 3 rooms, walking slowly and quietly, before a sudden thud echoed throughout the entire building. We stopped and looked at each other, but no more sounds came. Ryan said it was probably just a building settling in on its own weight, and we continued down the hallway. A lot of the rooms were either empty or just had a bunch of chairs lined up in them, but nothing really interesting. That was until we got to the next hallway, deeper into the school. This hallway had chairs scattered throughout, blocking the way through. We had to push them aside just to get to the rooms. The first room was locked, so we went down to the second room on the left side and looked in, seeing what looked like clothes hanging from the ceiling. I walked in and looked at it, unsure why or how those got there. After a moment, I wondered why Ryan hadn't said anything and if he was seeing what I saw. I turned around, and as my head moved across the room, I caught a glimpse of a figure in the far back. I shut my eyes to the far wall, seeing a disheveled man staring at us as he stood with something in his hand. To make it all worse, he had almost no clothing on. I quickly glanced at Ryan, who had his eyes fixed on the man as well, before he grabbed my arm and pulled me back into the hallway. Immediately, we heard something metal being thrown across the room toward the door we were at, followed by a horrific scream. We sprinted down the hallway and out the first open window we saw, then ran as far away as we could before losing our breath. On the rest of the walk home, we put the pieces together and realized the man was likely holding a knife, which was probably what he tried throwing at us. Considering his unstable state, it's likely the man was really dangerous, and had we stayed any longer or not noticed him, we might have not made it out. This was only a year ago. At the time, it had been a while since my last camping trip, and for a few months leading up to this, I was just really wanting to get out and camp like I always used to do. I finally had gotten some time off work and planned out a trip right away. There were some mountains not far, about a 2-hour drive from me, and there were plenty of trails on it. I scrolled through the pictures, but eventually just decided to choose once I got there. I wasn't too worried about the trail, and really just wanted to sit by my tent and relax for most of the time. I drove up to the mountain with 4 days worth of camping supplies and food. This wasn't really a popular mountain that people came to a lot, so there weren't many parking areas. I ended up finding a dirt plot on the side of the road and parked there, then got out and started walking along the road until I got to one of the camping trails. On the very grayed out map, it showed that the trail went a few miles into the forest and up the mountain, then split into 3 different paths that led to camping spots. I figured this would work, so I started the hike. It took just under 2 hours to get to the 3 paths. I saw no difference, so I just went with the left one. About 30 minutes later, I came up to the camping grounds. All it was an open area with less trees. Nobody else was there, and it didn't exactly look like anyone had been there in a long time. Everything had grown over to the point where if there wasn't a direct path leading to this place, it would just look like any other spot in the forest. I tossed my bags down by one of the trees and built up my tent, then sat on a log and ate my lunch. After that, I kinda just sat there, writing in my journal and listening to the birds. Once the sun was starting to get lower, I had to get a fire going to keep me warm, so I got up and walked around the perimeter of the camping grounds to find sticks to use. But not too far from my tent, I found something strange. A path leading off into the woods. Not a regular trail though. This was very clearly a footpath formed by someone walking that same route over and over. Usually these types of paths grow over quickly when not used, so the fact that it was so clear and noticeable was odd. I finished collecting sticks and prepped the campfire, but something about that path made me feel uneasy, and I just wanted to check what it was before camping the night right next to it. I grabbed my bag and started following the thin path. The more I walked on it, the more sure I was that someone was here recently. After a 15-minute walk, I reached the end. Out in the woods just beyond the path, there was a small cabin. It looked like it was decaying and abandoned. The wood was splintering, with entire boards missing, and the door was left wide open. I walked up to it and looked around, wondering why a footpath would lead to an abandoned hut in the woods. It was too far for someone to just stumble upon it. Curious, I peered in through the doorway. It was dark inside, and I couldn't really see much, but I could tell that it wasn't empty. There were things in there. I was about to take a step inside, but a sudden voice from behind me startled me away. "Leave. Go away," a man said sternly, almost angrily. I faced him, standing about 10 feet away. The man told me again to leave, and without saying a word, I did as he said. As I walked away, I looked back once, seeing the man standing at the end of the path and watching me to make sure I was leaving. Once I got back to my tent, it was already dark out, but I was not going to stay there. I quickly packed up and left, dangerously hiking in the pitch black with just a flashlight until I got back to my car. I don't know what was going on there, but what frightened me so much was that I was immediately sure that the man I saw did not live there. He was wearing regular, clean clothes and had no signs of even being out there for more than a couple days, which makes me question why he was out there and why he needed me to leave. And how did the footpath form if he didn't live there? Or was there someone else that did? The whole thing has me asking 100 questions, and I don't think there's ever going to be answers. I'm 26 years old, and this year I settled on a house. I'd been living with my roommates for the past almost 8 years, and seclusion is something I value, so finally buying a home for myself was a huge achievement. It was in a neighboring town about 2 hours out from where I used to live. This town was much smaller in scale and had way less buildings. That's not to say every house was on a farm or anything, but the neighborhoods were definitely not full of close together rows of houses. They were spread out, separated by fields of trees and grass. The home I bought was no exception, being modest and among the less expensive side of the housing market. It was out in a forest a few miles away from the market center in the town. On the day I moved in, I still hadn't met anyone in the area, not the neighbors or the townspeople. And with the house being so far out, with trees blocking the surrounding views, it really felt like I was moving out into the middle of nowhere, completely alone. Saying it like that makes it sound more eerie than it really felt, but it wasn't all that comforting of a thought either. I had a rental van for the day, so I got to work right away unloading my things into the house. To be as quick as possible, I tried to put pretty much everything right in the living room, rather than sorting it as I go. This took a few hours, and the sun was coming down just as I was finishing up. I set down a few boxes in the house and started walking out to the driveway for the last couple of boxes, but was caught off guard by a man standing on my porch, almost blocking the whole front door. He startled me, making me jump a bit before showing slight embarrassment and asking what he was here for. The man, looking about 50 or so, smiled and introduced himself as my new neighbor. I said it was nice to meet him and made a short smile, but couldn't really help but think about how I never saw him walking up the driveway to my house. In fact, I had no idea where he came from, given it was just forest around my house. The man stayed there, just kind of looking at me for a second, then turned and walked off my porch. I stood and just soaked in the strangeness of the encounter. After a moment, though, I stepped back outside and quickly got the rest of the boxes into the house. I checked out the windows to make sure the man was gone, and I didn't see him anywhere, so after a minute I went out and got in the van, driving it down the long dirt driveway. It had only been a few minutes since the man had left, yet I didn't see him walking as I drove down to the main road. There were no other paths that I was aware of, so this made me a bit more uneasy. Anyway, I returned the van and got a local taxi back home, then started on unpacking. I wasn't working fast because I was already tired and it was late, but I wanted to get some of the furniture put together before calling it a night. I grabbed the pieces to my bed frame and lugged them into my bedroom, beginning to piece it together before a sudden knock interrupted me. I stopped and listened, kind of shaken by it. I got up and quietly walked up to the front door. I kept the door shut and locked, but looked out the peephole and saw the same man from during the day. But this time, something was off about him, more so than before. His body was shaky, with his head moving around in an uncanny way, but his eyes were fixed on the doorknob. He was staring at it intensely, standing close to the door, as if waiting eagerly for me to open it. "Hey, it's your neighbor. Can you open the door?" he yelled, and then knocked again. I still remained on the other side, looking through the peephole. His face began to show frustration and anger, and he banged on the door one more time. He then turned and faced the pitch-black forest, looking out into the darkness. He held his hand up and did some sort of waving motion, followed by him running out into the forest in the direction he waved at. Terrified, I immediately called the police, but it was too late for them to be found and questioned. After that night, though, I never saw the man again. Even to this day, I now have met my neighbors, and of course, none of them were that man. And nobody in town seems to recognize him from my descriptions. I don't know who the man was signaling to in the forest, or even how many people could have been out there, waiting for the man to gain my trust and get me to open the door. What would have happened afterwards, I believe, is best left unthought of. I was driving on the empty highway, fighting to keep my eyes open. It was well past 1 a.m., and I couldn't help but look at the GPS every few seconds, hoping the estimated arrival time would somehow go down faster. I'd been on the road for a dangerous 15 hours straight, only stopping for food and gas on the way to my new home. I'd been forced to move for work, yet funnily enough, it was work that never let me take a trip to see the place I'd be moving to. Finally though, I made it to the highway exit and into the town I'd be living in. It was dark, so it wasn't exactly easy to see what everything looked like, but I could see enough to tell it wasn't as good as where I'd lived before. Most of the buildings looked like locally owned and run shops that were far from what I was used to. Along with that, most of the lights were off. When I got to my neighborhood though, it wasn't all that bad. The houses were pretty regular, sectioned close to each other. I pulled up to my house and parked on the side of the road, then got out to see the place I'd be calling home for the next year. From the outside, it looked like all the others, but what really mattered was the inside. I walked up the driveway and pulled out the key I'd been sent a few days ago, putting it in the lock and turning it, but there was no click. I grabbed the handle and pressed on the door, watching it glide open. It was already unlocked. I quickly went in and looked to make sure that my things were there, as movers had dropped everything off in the morning. After a quick look, nothing seemed to be missing. I knew it was likely that the movers had just forgotten to lock the place up, but it still gave me a bad feeling. On top of all that though, the lights and electricity didn't work. I knew I had to set it up in town, and it was obviously too late at this point to do it tonight, but I didn't think they would just cut the power. I turned my phone light on and started looking through the rooms. The downstairs was okay, pretty standard looking, but with a slightly older sort of feel to it. I made my way up to the second floor. At the top of the stairs was a long hallway with 5 doors. I stepped into each of the rooms one by one, shining my phone light around. They were all very small, and a lot of them had water damage on the ceiling and walls. But when I opened the door to the master bedroom, I was surprised to see a single top laying on the floor. It looked dirty, like maybe something the movers had used to wrap furniture with. But what made it so odd was that there was nothing at all upstairs aside from that top. All the furniture and boxes were downstairs. I took a step back and closed the door. I was already so tired, I just wanted this night to be over with. I really didn't want to crowd my mind with the uncertainties of moving here. I went back downstairs and sat on one of the sofa chairs that was still wrapped up in plastic and rested my eyes. My eyes jolted open as a sudden thud echoed throughout the house from above me. Honestly, I don't even know if I'd fallen asleep or not. All I remember was sitting down and closing my eyes. The sound was harsh though, not just some small thump. I stood up and went to the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the dark hallway. The house was now silent. I must have stood there for a whole minute before taking my phone out and turning on the flashlight, then slowly walking up the creaky stairs. When I got to the top of the steps and shined the light down the hallway, I immediately saw the door at the far end was slightly open, and the unmistakable outline of a figure was standing between the crack in the doorway, looking right at me. I almost fell backwards down the steps as my immediate reaction was to turn and run. I sprinted for the front door and straight out into the driveway and into my car. I thought about driving away, but knowing literally all of my things were inside that house, I wanted to make sure whoever was in there didn't make it out with anything. I called 911 and waited for their arrival on the side of the road. During the whole 5 minutes, I never saw any movement in the windows or anyone leave through the front. When the police searched the house though, The back door was wide open. It was obvious to them that whoever that was had been living inside the house, probably since it had been vacant over the past couple months. At first I thought they were talking about the attic, since I'd looked through all the rooms and saw nothing but a top. But there was no attic. They were talking about the master bedroom, which meant that when I was looking around upstairs that night and I opened the door to that room, it's likely that the person was hiding along the wall, probably right behind the door. And if I'd gone further inside the room to investigate the top and look around, there's a chance that I wouldn't have made it out. This happened to me 3 years ago when I'd moved into a small home. It was only a mile from where I was living before, so it wasn't a very unfamiliar place at all. However, it was on the side of town that I didn't really go to often, due to it having a record of crimes and just overall a bad reputation. At the time, I wasn't in a good financial place, so I had to go with the cheaper places, which happened to be in that area. The day I moved in, I didn't talk or really even see anyone. I just moved my stuff from the U-Haul into my new place. On the second day, I started the unpacking process by moving the boxes and furniture into the rooms that they belonged in. Once I got to moving my office furniture though, I saw something out the window that caught my attention. There was a man, young, like 25 years old, standing in my driveway. I watched as he just looked at the house and walked into the yard, looking into my windows from afar. Getting uncomfortable, I left the window and went downstairs to confront him. But when I opened the door and looked outside, he was already gone. Not in my yard or driveway, or even on any of the sidewalks. He just completely left. I waited to see if he'd come back, but then shrugged it off and got back to what I was doing. Yeah, it was weird, but I didn't know what exactly I was supposed to do about it. I got my office set up, then went out to get some lunch before getting back to work on the bedroom. By 8 p.m., I was pretty tired. I kept on with it for as long as I could, but once 10 o'clock rolled around, I was just done for the night. The house was still a mess, but I left it as is, turning off all the lights and getting in bed. It only took a few minutes for me to fall asleep. When I woke up, I rolled my head over and looked at the clock I had laying on the floor. 3 a.m. I rolled back over and closed my eyes, but a muffled sound woke me right back up. I lifted my head and listened again, hearing a faint sound from downstairs. It was like something being dragged across the floor. Still in disbelief, I sat up and listened even more intently. A few seconds later, a similar sound came again. I stood from my bed and walked over to the bedroom door, opening it and looking down the hallway as I listened. But as soon as I opened the door, all the sounds stopped. I walked into the hall and over to the staircase. I went down a few steps and looked over the railing, but I didn't see anything, and the house was still completely quiet. When I got to the last step, I flicked on the light. At first, everything looked okay, nothing missing and nobody in the house. But then I noticed something really strange. All of the furniture and boxes that were against the walls had been pushed away, and behind them, there were several carved out portions in the wall. I felt blood rush from my face as I realized that someone had to have broken into my house and may even still be inside. I ran up to my room and called for help, but the house remained quiet the whole time I waited. What's more unsettling is that the cops couldn't figure out how the intruder gotten inside, or back outside. Nor did they figure out why the person broke in. The only idea is that it looks like they were looking for something in the walls. I don't know what, but there was nothing else to go off of. I think back to that man I saw standing outside my house, wondering if he was the one to have broken in. But even 3 years later, nothing else is known about what happened that night. I was homeschooled growing up. This happened when I was about 14, I think. I'm the oldest among my siblings, and I have 2 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters. One time, I was going through a regular school day. We could do school sort of wherever we wanted in the house. On this particular day, I remember that I was in my bedroom, which was on the first floor. I was sitting at my desk, which faced the wall. My siblings and mom were in the living room or kitchen, where she was teaching them. I was working on some type of assignment. I don't remember exactly what. I was trying to get it done though, because once I got stuff done, school would be over for the day. That was the nice part about being homeschooled for me, because I could get all my stuff done in like 2 or 3 hours sometimes. So as I was racing to complete my assignments and bring it to my mom, I got really focused. But randomly, as I was working, I suddenly heard the sound of a knock at my window. At least that's what it sounded like. My bedroom window faced the backyard, and there were a few bushes and trees nearby. My desk was facing the complete opposite way, so I had to turn around to see it. I stopped what I was doing and looked. When I did, I just barely saw something moving out of sight. It seemed as though someone had been at the window. I didn't get a look at them at all. I couldn't even tell what part of them I saw for less than a second. Maybe their arm? I just could tell that somebody had been at the window. It was really creepy because it was broad daylight and our neighborhood was not known for random prowlers. Well, I got up and went over to the window and looked out. I didn't see anything at first. I looked all around the yard, at least where I could see a bit. I couldn't see everything, but I didn't see a sign of a person back there. They would have had time to move out of the backyard though. I figured that it was somebody walking through our backyard to get to another one or something. Maybe it was even somebody trying to break into our house, but they saw that someone was home and went away. I found that to be unlikely, but still was a creepy thought. After looking around for a minute or 2, I went back to my desk to continue working. I went back to my homework, and soon was focused on that again. I would say about 5 or 10 minutes went by. When I was still at my desk, I got a bad feeling. It was the feeling like I was being watched or something. I was just creeped out, and I figured that I was still spooked from what happened earlier. So I stopped what I was doing and turned around. I looked to the window again, but this time, there was a man right outside. He had dark hair and was just staring at me from the other side of the window. I was so surprised that I couldn't move for a second. I really didn't think that the person would come back. I didn't know what he wanted or what he was doing here. The man stayed there, just staring at me with minimal expression on his face. This went on for what felt like a long time, probably about 20 seconds. Then I finally got up. I ran out of my bedroom and went for the living room. My mom was there with all my siblings, and she was working with them as they did their school. She saw me come running in, and I said that there was a man at my window. My mom came back to my room with me, but when we got there, the guy was gone. We looked out all the windows, and after I described what happened, my mom called the police. They came out and searched our property, as well as looking around the neighborhood, but they never found the guy. He must have actually left for good that time. I spoke with police for a bit, and then they left. For the next month at least, I didn't study alone in my bedroom. I also covered my windows almost all the time. The whole situation really freaked me out, but luckily nothing like that ever happened again. I'm not sure why the guy came to our yard and looked in my window. I'm just glad that he never returned. I was a kid, we moved around quite a bit. My dad was always changing locations for his job, and I sort of got used to it. We would move sometimes multiple times a year, and because of this, my sister and I did homeschool. It was much easier than having to keep changing schools all the time. Overall, I enjoyed it for the most part. We would be home during the day, but one time something really creepy happened. I remember that it was not that long after we moved into another new house. We lived in a number of different kinds of houses, but most of them were pretty average. We never had a really big house or a really small house either. This one had 2 floors and a basement and was pretty standard. One day I was doing school in the family room and my mom was upstairs with my sister. I believe that I was maybe 10 or 12 and my sister would have been about 4 or 5 years old. She obviously required more attention than I did, so I was by myself at the moment. The family room was at one end of the house and I was sitting on the couch we had in there. The basement door was at the end of that room. As I was looking down at my book, I heard the sound of the basement door opening. At first, I assumed that it was my mom. I mean, who else could it be? And I was pretty invested in what I was reading, so I wasn't giving it much thought. But after I remember about a second or two, I realized that my mom was upstairs with my sister. That couldn't be her. Then, I looked over and suddenly felt really nervous. When I looked to the door, I saw somebody start to enter the family room. They were maybe 20 feet away from me. I jumped up from the couch and ran out of the room. I'm not sure if the person saw me or not, but I never saw them. I just saw their arm opening the door and then them starting to walk out. It looked to be a man, but beyond that, I couldn't tell anything because I never got a look at his face. I ran to the other side of the house and I wanted to go upstairs. But for some reason, I panicked and I went into a bathroom instead. I'm not really sure what I was thinking looking back. I just know that I got in there and unlocked the door. When I did, I felt a little bit safer, but I still didn't know what to do. I had no phone and didn't want to call for help. I heard footsteps moving through the family room not that far away, but I didn't hear them for long. As it was, I couldn't hear very well being locked in the bathroom. But after like 10 minutes of not hearing anything, I had no idea what to do. I was worried for my mom and sister that were upstairs. I thought that I would have heard it if the intruder went upstairs, but I wasn't 100% sure, so I decided to go up and see. I gathered up the courage and then slowly and quietly opened up the bathroom door. When I did, everything seemed quiet and normal. The staircase really wasn't that far away. I ran for it and then went up the stairs. I then went down the hallway and found my sister's bedroom. The door was mostly shut, but not all the way. I went inside to find my mom reading a book to my sister. I was glad to see that they were okay, and they seemed to have no idea that anybody else was downstairs. I told them what I had seen. At first, they couldn't believe it, but I also wasn't the type of kid to make stuff up. We didn't know where the man had gone, so we all stayed upstairs and my mom called the police. Then we all waited up there. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. In the time that we were upstairs, we didn't hear anything at all. I kind of thought that the person had left. The police came inside and searched the entire house. Surprisingly, they found a man hiding in the basement. He was arrested and did not say anything. We were all very shocked, but also very relieved that he was now gone. We didn't know how long he had been down there, or how he had even got in. The basement in our house was rarely used, and mostly just extra storage for us. Nobody went down there on a regular basis, so it was a good place for him to hide. I'm not sure why he came upstairs or what his plans were. Luckily, nothing like that ever happened again. This happened years ago when I was a kid. I was homeschooled up until the time that I went to high school. This happened when I was 10 years old. During this time, I lived with my parents and sister in a pretty average house. Our neighborhood was also what I would describe as average. I always considered it to be safe, and I would guess that my parents did as well. The typical school day for me was to work through these books that I had. They were basically the same kind of books that you would do in school. Instead of sitting in class, though, I would just do them at home. I would read the chapter and then do the worksheet that was at the end of it. My mom was my teacher and would assign me what problems to do and stuff. She would also grade me and help explain things to me that I didn't understand. Then she would give me tests as well. So one day, my dad was at work and I was doing school. I really don't remember why, but my mom went someplace with my sister. It might have been just to the grocery store or something. I don't recall why I didn't go with them, but I didn't. I was just old enough at that age to be able to stay home by myself. So I remember that my mom left, and I was sitting in the living room at this table that we had in there. I was doing some school and working on some type of worksheet. It was probably like 10 minutes after they left, and sometime in the late morning. The The table that I was sitting at was sort of at the end of the living room. I remember that I was just looking about, and I noticed something in one of the windows. It was a window near the far end of the room, and I saw that somebody was looking inside of it. It appeared to be a man, but I didn't get a good look at him at all. He was not looking in my direction that I was aware of. The window that he was looking in was at the front of our house. I was really creeped out by this. I got up and walked over to the window to look. When I did, he was completely gone. I didn't see the man in our front yard or in the street. I wasn't quite sure where he went, but I was just glad that he was gone now. So after that, I just went back to the table and continued my school. I'm not sure exactly how long I was doing that. Maybe like 5 minutes at most. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the back door to our house opening. I was so confused at first, but then I quickly realized what was happening. The man I saw in the window must have went around to the back and entered. I didn't realize that the back door had been left unlocked, but apparently it was. Now, from where I was in that moment, I was at the edge of the living room and the dining room. Connecting to the dining room in the back of the house was the kitchen where the back door was. So the man entering the house was out of my sight, but just barely. When I heard footsteps entering the house, I quickly got up and ran into the living room. This was farther away and more out of sight of the guy. We had carpet in the entire living room, so luckily I probably didn't make much noise. I wasn't really thinking, but I knew I had to get out of there or hide. I just quickly went to the couch and then hid underneath it. The couch was large and had a decent amount of space below it, plus I was small. It was one of my favorite hiding places for hide and seek when I was younger. So after I got under the couch, I tried to be as quiet as I could. I heard footsteps drawing closer, and I got really nervous. He soon approached the living room. That was when I realized that I had to call the police. But back then, cell phones were not as common at all. I certainly didn't have one as a 10-year-old. So the man walked just inside the living room, and I was really freaked out. It sounded like he was walking closer, but not directly towards me. He seemed to walk through the living room and then towards the hallway. That led to some of the bedrooms. I felt a little bit safer when the footsteps got farther away, but I was still terrified. I looked around under the couch, and the only thing that was in there was an extra blanket and some extra pillows for the couch. I moved myself over towards the back corner of the couch underneath it. That's when I had an idea. On the right side of our couch, near where I was, there was a side table, and on that side table was a corded house phone. It was one of the several that we had in the house back then. I knew if I could just get the phone, I could call the police, but I didn't want to risk leaving my hiding place. I also didn't want to make any noise. I lifted up the trim that went around the bottom of the couch. The cord for the phone was somewhat long, and it went over the edge of the back side of the side table a little bit. I took the blanket from under the couch and moved it up against the wall and behind the table a little. Then I reached and grabbed the cord from the back and yanked on it. This pulled the phone from its place and it fell onto the floor. It hit the blanket, which prevented it from making nearly as much noise by hitting the wall or floor. Then I grabbed the phone and was able to make a call. It was also lucky that our model of phone allowed you to dial on the actual phone, and the number pad was not on the phone holder. So I hit 911, and then mostly covered the phone with the blanket so there wouldn't be any noise. I was able to just hear enough by pressing my ear to the blanket near the ear part of the phone. When the 911 operator asked me what was going on, I whispered that somebody broke into my house. I said that I was hiding underneath the couch and gave our address. I was told that the police were on the way and to stay hidden. They stayed on the line with me and it made me feel a little bit better. Meanwhile, I hadn't heard anything inside of our house in a while. I knew that they had gone towards the bedrooms, but beyond that, I didn't know what was happening. A few minutes went by and I remained hidden where I was. I still heard nothing. It wasn't until a couple of minutes after that I heard a noise coming from down the hallway. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it assured me that the person was still here and still down the hall. They seemed to be in one of the bedrooms. I kept hiding, and it felt like forever waiting for the police to get there. The person stayed where they were for the next few minutes. Then, at last, I heard some noise out front. The police were finally here. I heard some movement down the hall, and then footsteps. The man started moving back from the hallway to the living room. But he wasn't in the living room for long, and quickly moved back out towards the kitchen. It was a huge relief to hear that. He then left the house quickly, but the police got up with him not long after. They must have seen him fleeing. I finally came out from underneath the couch. The first thing I remembered was seeing some police in the front yard. And then I went over and opened up the front door. I was told that they located a man in the backyard. An officer came inside and spoke with me, and then they contacted my mom. She got home a short time later. It was a very crazy experience. After that, I wasn't left home alone for a long time, and I didn't want to be either. Looking back, I can't believe that situation worked out as well as it did. I was really scared, but I was able to do what I had to do. I feel very lucky that it turned out the way that it did. For a little background, I'm a female, and this took place when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and I would describe myself as a pretty average student. I had a good group of friends that I would talk to at school and hang out with sometimes. At the time this took place, I was not dating anybody when Valentine's Day came. It was just another day to me, but at my school, you could buy somebody a rose. Then it would get delivered to whoever you wanted it to, during study hall by teachers' aides. It was popular for guys at the school to get their girlfriend a rose. So on Valentine's Day that year, I obviously wasn't expecting one. In study hall, I was in Spanish class and just doing homework. I noticed a student enter our room holding several roses, and then she mentioned some names of other girls. They raised their hands and she gave them their roses. Then she said my name, and I was really surprised. I raised my hand and she gave me one of the roses. I had no idea who had got me a rose though. One of my friends that was in the class asked me who it was from, and I told her I didn't know. We started talking, thinking about who could have done it. I really wasn't aware of any guys that would do that. I sort of had a crush on this one guy that was on the football team, and we talked here and there. So I was kind of hoping that it was from him, but I didn't really think so. We weren't that close yet or anything. As the day went on, I was trying to figure out who sent me the rose, but I really had no answers. I talked with a few more of my friends, but none of them seemed to know anything either. Then I had my final class of the day, which was science. When it was over, I got back to my locker to get my things and go home. As I arrived at my locker though, I saw that there was a note attached to it. I took it out and read it. The note said, "I see that you got the rose I sent you. I hope you like it." The handwriting was kind of sloppy. It didn't give me any clues as to who left it. I looked around the crowded hallway, but still didn't have an answer. So I got my things and then left to walk home. During this time, I walked to school and back because I didn't have my license just yet, and we lived really close to the school. I would only take a few sidewalks the entire way, and it took me maybe 15 minutes to walk back most days. On that very same day, when I was walking home from school, I saw this guy walking behind me. It was kind of hard to tell because he was a really long ways back. I couldn't hear him walking or anything. I don't even know why I looked behind me, but at one point, I think about halfway back, I did look behind. Normally, when I walked home from school, I was all by myself, so when I noticed the guy, it was a little bit unusual. But I still didn't think too much of it. It was this one guy that did go to my school, but I didn't know his name or anything. I just recognized him. He wasn't in my grade and was really tall, with curly blonde hair and glasses. I walked the rest of the way home, and as I was going up my driveway, looked to the left and saw him. He was still a really far ways back and walking down the sidewalk towards me. I didn't know that he lived in my neighborhood, and I had never seen him walking before. It was kind of odd. I went inside my house and then went into my bedroom to finish my homework. I remember that as I was in there, probably about 15 minutes later, there was a knock on the front door. I was home by myself because my parents were both still at work. I got up and left my bedroom and went to the front door, but by the time I got there, whoever had knocked was gone. I looked around and didn't see anybody at all. Then I just went back to my bedroom. It was really strange. A couple of hours later, my parents got home from work. I remember that my mom came into my room and dropped an envelope on my desk. She said that it was on the front step when they got home, and my name was on it. I was even more confused now. I opened it up and read it. It was from the same person who sent the rose to me and left the note on my locker. The letter said that he saw that I got the rose and letter and wanted to meet me before school at 7:30 a.m. the next day. I was supposed to go to the back parking lot. I knew that there was a pretty good chance that it was the guy who followed me home. I found it creepy that he was being all mysterious, and I had never talked to him before, and I didn't find him attractive at all either. I decided to go, just to tell him that I appreciated the rose, but was not interested, and he didn't have to follow me home. Normally, I would get to school at about 7:30 anyways, and school started at 7:50. So when I got there, I went into the back parking lot. This parking lot was pretty quiet, and just overflow from the main other two lots. It was mostly used for football games or other sports, and only a few kids would park their cars there for school. When I got there were a couple of cars parked around, but nobody was in the parking lot that I noticed. Then I saw a door open to one of the cars, and the same guy who followed me home came out. I knew that it would be him. He walked over to me and said hi. Then he told me that his name was James, and he was the one who sent me the rose. I told him I knew that because he followed me home. He said he did that just because he wanted to leave me the letter. Before I had a chance to say anything, he told me that we should talk inside of his car. I didn't want to because I didn't want to spend any more time there. I said no thanks, I had to get to class, and I started to tell him that I really wasn't interested in him. When I said it though, he said that I should go in his car again. He said that I should just hang out with him today, and he knew that I would have a good time. Then he said that we should skip school and drive someplace. I said no and started walking back. That's when he started to follow me, and I looked to see him walking quickly in my direction. I just started running at that point towards the school. He actually started to chase after me, running at full speed, but then he stopped shortly after. I had made it far enough away that somebody in the main parking lot would have seen him chasing after me. I was able to get back to school after that. I hoped that I would never see him again. I remember that over the next few days, he sent me a few messages on social media, calling me names and stuff. I just blocked him on everything. After that, I hardly ever saw him again. He was a senior that year, and I guess he skipped school a lot anyways. That was the craziest Valentine's Day I've ever had. This happened on Valentine's Day last year. I was going out to a restaurant with my girlfriend Veronica. The restaurant was pretty nice, but not too fancy. It was a big restaurant, and when we got there, it was also very busy. Luckily, we were able to get a table and had our Valentine's date. Now, fast forward to maybe an hour. We were just sitting there talking, and I had already paid and everything. So we were going to be leaving soon, but we're just enjoying our conversation. I had to use the restroom, so I got up and said that I would be right back. Veronica stayed at the table. I walked to the back of the place and was in the restroom for less than a minute. When I returned to the table, Veronica was gone. I assumed at first that she went to the restroom as well. I sat back down and waited for her to return. But then I felt my phone vibrate from getting a text. I looked at it and saw that it was from Veronica, and she said that some crazy guy was after her. I didn't know what this meant, and I asked her what she was talking about. She responded saying that she was in the parking lot. I was very confused, but decided to go out into the parking lot and find Veronica wherever she was. The restaurant overall was still very busy and people were all over the place. I walked out and into the parking lot. There were cars parked all over, and on the sides of the parking lot were some grassy areas. There were a few bushes and trees in them as well. After leaving the restaurant, I did not immediately see anybody else. I stood in the middle of the parking lot and texted Veronica again, asking her where she was. I told her that I was now in the parking lot, and she told me she was behind a bush and to be careful. As I looked around for her, I called out her name. Then I saw her. She was looking out from behind a bush at me. But just seconds later, somebody hit me. I had no idea what happened, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground. I saw a guy next to me, and then I realized that he had tackled me. He started to get up, and I grabbed him and tried to wrestle him to the ground. We struggled for a few moments, and in the struggle, I was able to get one good punch to his face. Veronica had now walked over to us. When I got up, we both ran to the car. The guy didn't get knocked out or anything, and he got up shortly after and chased after us moments later. We were able to make it inside of my car just in time, before he reached it and tried opening the door. When the door didn't work, he started to bang on the windows. I quickly drove away with him hitting my car until he couldn't anymore. It all happened so fast, it felt like less than a minute. But in reality, I think it was like 2 or 3 minutes. After we left, we called the police and reported the whole thing. We went back and talked to officers, and the man had run away, but was located in a nearby parking lot. I was fine with just minor scrapes and scratches. Veronica told me that she noticed a guy earlier in the restaurant, and he was sitting sort of behind me. She noticed him looking at her once or twice, but didn't think too much of it. When I left to go to the restroom, apparently he got up and walked right over to her. He asked her to come and sit with him, and when she said no, he tried to grab her arm. She then got up and left the restaurant, planning to go out to the car and not thinking the guy would follow her. But she realized when she got out that I had the keys and noticed a man leaving the restaurant too. She then ran out of his sight and hid behind a bush. The guy was walking around the parking lot looking for her when I left. He obviously knew that I was her boyfriend and attacked me. I didn't know any of this until after. It still blows my mind when I think back to it. And I'm really glad that Veronica and I were okay and that the man was caught. I'm a single female who lives alone in a one-bedroom apartment. I live on the first floor and moved in right around a year ago. This story takes place on Valentine's Day of last year. My new apartment was in a pretty large and new building, and I had a unit on the first floor. After living there for about a week or two, it was Valentine's Day. I got up that morning to go to work and was going to leave at 7 a.m. When I opened up my door to leave my apartment, I saw that there was a heart-shaped Valentine taped to it. When I saw it, I thought that it was something left by the apartment management. They had left me a welcome thing with some small gifts, and my previous apartment would do that sort of stuff too. I didn't even read it and just put it on my countertop to look at when I got home from work. When I got home that day, I finally read the Valentine, and I quickly realized that it was not left by management. It said my name on it, and it was handwritten. On the inside, it said that I was possibly the most beautiful girl in the entire apartment complex. The person then said they hoped we could spend next Valentine's Day together. I was really creeped out by this. The way that it was written was so weird, and I didn't know anybody there yet at all. I'd barely spoke to anybody in the hallways, so obviously I had no idea who did this, but clearly somebody had been watching me. Now, just mere hours later, I was in my kitchen and starting to cook. My kitchen is at the front of my apartment, right by the door. When I'm at the counter, I face the rest of my apartment, which is the living room and then the patio door at the other end. It was probably about 7 p.m. and dark outside. As I was standing at the counter, I suddenly noticed that a man was standing outside of my patio door and looking in. I didn't know who he was and had never seen him before. I ducked down behind the counter. When I looked up again several moments later, he was gone. I realized then that must be the guy who left me the Valentine, but I had never noticed him before. It made me wonder if he had been looking in my apartment windows previously, but I just didn't notice. I hope not. It was possible that he just saw me leaving to go to work or whatever, because there were numerous apartments that looked out to the parking lot where my car was. Either way, somebody here was being as creepy as they could possibly be. I thought about calling the police or reporting him, but I didn't even have a good description of the guy. I only saw him for like a second, and he was outside, so it wasn't very clear at all. He just appeared to be a Caucasian male, about 6 feet tall, and darkish colored hair. I sent an email to apartment management, letting them know what happened. I didn't know what could be done about it, though. For the rest of that night, everything was mostly fine. I had shut my curtains, obviously, and was now going to bed. But at that time, almost 11 p.m., I thought I heard the sound of my doorknob turning. I was in my bedroom, so I didn't hear it as well. I stopped what I was doing and listened. Then I heard a knock on the door. My heart started racing as soon as I heard it. I knew who it likely was. I got my phone and was ready to call the police. Then I quietly walked over to my door. I looked through the peephole to the other side, and when I did, I saw a man who certainly resembled the guy at my window. I called the police right then and there. Then I moved back into my bedroom to talk with them and say what the situation was. About a minute later, the guy knocked again. This was followed by another knock about a minute after that. The police were on the way, and I hoped that they would get there fast. The man knocked once more, but this time I heard him yelling for help. I remember him asking if anybody was home, and if they could please come for the door because he needed help. I knew that this was probably just his desperate attempt to try to get me to open up the door for him. After that, I didn't hear anything for a little while. I assumed that he left, but he didn't. He stayed there all the way until the police arrived several minutes after that. They spoke with the man and to me as well. I was really glad that the guy didn't run away. The man did not get arrested, but he did end up getting evicted from the apartment building, and he was also trespassed and not allowed to come back. And since that night, I haven't seen him. My name is Emily, and this story took place on Valentine's Day 2 years ago. I have a boyfriend named Jake, and we had planned to go out for Valentine's. We were going to go to this one restaurant in town after work. I had an apartment about 10 minutes away from Jake across town. We both worked on Valentine's Day earlier, but planned on meeting for dinner at 6 o'clock. He told me that he was going to make reservations. Jake and I were texting throughout the day on and off, and I remember at probably about 11 a.m., he told me that he might have to leave work a little late. I asked him if he could still make the dinner reservations for 6 p.m., and he said that he thought so. Then we didn't text for the next few hours. I got off of work and went home, and then texted Jake letting him know that. He did not immediately respond. I texted him a little while later, asking if we should meet at the restaurant or if he was going to pick me up. He responded saying that he would meet me there. I figured that he might be running a little bit late. I got all ready and then texted Jake asking him how he was doing. He responded saying that he was already at the restaurant. It was only 5:30 and I was really confused. I left right then and there and drove for the restaurant. I was wondering if I had the times mixed up or something, but I looked over the texts and he had said 6 before. Something just seemed off, but I didn't know what it was. I arrived at the restaurant at maybe 5:40 or so and then walked inside. It was pretty busy and I looked around to see if I could find Jake, but I didn't see him anywhere. I walked around the entire place and he wasn't there. I did see a man who was staring at me though, and kind of standing by himself in the corner. I texted Jake asking him where he was and he didn't immediately respond. I walked out of the restaurant thinking maybe Jake texted me incorrectly. Maybe he wasn't there but just on his way. I was going to walk back to my car and try to figure out what was going on. Inside the restaurant just felt too awkward standing there by myself. When I made it outside, I was walking to my car and noticed a guy who had been staring at me in the restaurant walk out after me. I turned to where my car was and he did the same. I walked faster and soon reached my vehicle and got inside. The man got there seconds later and I couldn't believe that he was now at my car. He was standing at my driver's window and he knocked on it. I lowered it just an inch or so, and the man then asked me if I could give him a ride. This guy was a lot older than me, probably in his 40s or 50s, and had grayish hair. I told him that I couldn't give him a ride, and he just kept standing there. I was really creeped out, so I decided to call Jake. I wanted to know where on earth he was. When I pulled out my phone and called him, I heard a phone ring on the man that was outside my car. Then I realized that he had Jake's phone. I drove out of there as fast as I could. I went to Jake's place and luckily he was there. He told me that he lost his phone and couldn't find it anywhere. He said that he went to my place, but when he saw that I was gone, he went back to his. I told him about the guy who had his phone, and he was texting me pretending to be him. Then we called the police with my phone. We told them all the information that we could, and Jake's phone was later found in the parking lot of that same restaurant. But the man was nowhere to be seen. This was the craziest thing to ever happen to me. I used to be a janitor for a high school. It was a job that I only had for about a year, and this was back in 2019. The job was not too bad, but I moved on to other things later. For the most part, when I worked as a janitor, I would work overnights in the high school, and typically was all by myself. I would start at 9 o'clock at night and get off at 5 o'clock in the morning. The high school was large, but not so big that I couldn't manage it. With all that time and the whole place to myself, I could clean everything that I was supposed to. A few times, due to events on the school campus, there were some people there around the time I started, but they would usually be gone within an hour or two. I would do the things that you would expect: mop floors, vacuum, sweep, and maintain the bathrooms. Not every room in the school required attention taking, so it's not like I was cleaning every single classroom every night. I would even have some downtime, where I would just go on my phone and whatever. It was honestly a decent job. The only downside was that I had to be nocturnal and work overnights and sleep during the day. The other downside was that I was all by myself all night in a school, which sometimes felt sort of creepy. Most of the lights would be off, and a lot of them were motion-detected lights, so they would turn on when I went near them. One night, I was working in a random hallway cleaning the floors. It was probably about midnight or 1 a.m. I remember that I thought I heard footsteps coming from not that far away. I looked over, but saw nothing. Now, the footsteps might not have been in my sight and come from around the corner. I walked over, wondering who was in here. As far as I knew, I was all by myself like always. When I made it to the end of the hallway, I looked around, but saw nothing. I went back over to where I had been and continued work. Maybe I had just imagined it. I wasn't 100% sure because it hadn't been very loud. But probably 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps again. This time, I knew I was hearing it. I looked to the end of the hallway, and when I did, saw a man walking by. I only saw him for a couple of seconds because he walked past the hall to another. He was only visible for a short amount of time. I could tell that it was a man though, and seemingly an adult. But beyond that, I couldn't really tell any details because he was kind of far away. I started walking over and called out, asking who was there. Nobody was supposed to be in the school at this time. Nobody answered me when I called out though. When I got to the end of the hallway and looked, he was gone. There were other hallways that he could have gone down though. I walked a little ways farther looking around and asking if anybody was there. But I saw no one and didn't hear anything either. After that, I wasn't really sure what to do. I just ended up going back to work where I had been. Some time went by, and eventually I moved into another hallway. Probably 3 hours or so after the last time I saw the guy, something else happened. This time, I was facing the end of the hallway, and out of nowhere, I heard this noise behind me. I couldn't really tell what it was. I turned around and looked back and saw a basketball rolling right in my direction. It went past me and hit a locker. When I looked up to where it had been rolling from, I didn't see anybody. I suspected that whoever was in the building stood at the end of the hallway that I was in and rolled the ball towards me. Then they moved away out of my sight, but why they did it, I had no idea. I picked up the ball and walked to the end of the hallway to where it had been rolled from. I called out once more, asking if anybody was there. Still, nobody answered me. I stood there in silence, looking around for like 5 minutes. I didn't see or hear anything at all. Somebody was messing with me, but I didn't know why. I mean, they weren't even supposed to be here in the first place. Once more, I went back to work. From that point on, I wasn't bothered again for the rest of my shift that day. Just before I was done, I decided to walk all around the school to look for the person. I went into every wing and hallway and asked if anybody was there in each one. I even checked all of the bathrooms, but nobody ever answered me, and I didn't see anyone either. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I got off, and another janitor got there. I told him about what had happened and asked him to keep an eye out for the guy. Then I left the school and drove home. During this time, I was living in a small house by myself, about 10 minutes away from the school. I got back, and my typical routine was to go to bed and get some sleep. It was strange to go to sleep at like 6 a.m., but I got used to it. So on this day, it was probably 5 minutes after I got back home and I was in my kitchen. That's when I heard a knock on my front door. Instantly, I was confused. I walked over to the living room and looked out of the front window. Nobody was there. Just off in the distance, I saw a guy walking down the street. I saw him for just a second or two before he went out of my sight. Looked like the same guy who had been inside the school. I was so creeped out. I didn't fall asleep for hours. But luckily, the man never returned. And after that day, nothing like that happened in the school ever again either. I still wonder though, who he was and what he was doing. One time, I was working in an office building. It was a pretty standard building, with several floors and cubicles and stuff. The building was empty overnight as far as I knew, but I was only supposed to be working on the first floor. I was supposed to be cleaning the office area and vacuum the large amount of carpet that they had on that level, as well as cleaning some other things. This story takes place on probably my second week working there. To that point, it had been very easy. I was all by myself each night, and things were going smooth. I got my work done in plenty of time, typically most nights. One random night though, it was 2 a.m. and I was changing one of the trash cans. Out of nowhere, I heard the sound of glass breaking. I had no idea what was going on for a few seconds. It was just so unexpected that my brain was trying to make sense of it. Soon though, I realized the obvious, that somebody must have broken in. That's when I realized I might be in danger. The glass breaking sound came from a ways away. There were lots of cubicles and dividers and stuff, so whoever broke in was out of my sight. I wasn't sure what to do, so I got on the ground and crawled to a cubicle. I went inside, being as quiet as I could, and then I hid underneath a desk. What I heard then was footsteps moving a ways away, but inside. I obviously didn't know who had seemingly broken into the office building or why. The footsteps started moving closer. I was paranoid that they somehow knew I was in here or something. They were still a long ways away and seemed to slow down a little. It was at that moment when I finally had the thought to call the police, but it was so quiet in there other than the person walking that I was afraid to. If I so much as moved a muscle, I was scared the person would hear me. I was literally sitting there completely still and almost holding my breath. Whoever was in there seemed to stop and was still a ways away. I didn't hear much, but could tell that they were staying in the same area. This went on for about 2 or 3 minutes if I had to guess. Then they started to walk again and walk closer to me. For this time, they probably moved to within about 30 feet of me, and I got very nervous. I was just thinking that they might suddenly look under the desk. They stopped up, and I couldn't tell what they were doing. At that point, I really badly wanted to call the police. I just couldn't bring myself to do it though. I was convinced that if I moved at all to get my phone, the person would hear it. I reached for my pocket, but then stopped. It seemed like I was making too much noise. Then I just froze and held my breath, trying not to make a sound at all. The person remained where they were, doing who knows what. They stayed in that area for what felt like forever. I honestly don't know exactly how long it was. Maybe 5 minutes at most, but that's a long time for the situation that I was in. Finally, I heard them walking back in the direction that they came from. I continued to not move a muscle. They went pretty far away, and then I stopped hearing them at all. I wasn't sure if they had left or what. I waited for probably 5 more minutes without hearing them at all. That's when I finally determined that they must have left. I finally grabbed my phone and called the police. Still, I wasn't 100% sure that they were gone, so I spoke as quietly as I could. I was told that the police were on the way, and I remained hidden underneath the desk. In the time that I was waiting, I didn't hear any more noises at all. I was able to leave the area underneath the desk, and was very sure that the person had gone. When I looked around, everything seemed to be in place. The police arrived next, and I told them what happened. One of the windows a ways away was in fact broken, but I had no clue if anything was stolen or not, because I didn't know everything that the office building had. Nothing that I was aware of was in any different place than before. After that, I was sent home because the police were going to stay there and do more investigating. I returned to work there several nights later to continue with my job. For the rest of the time that I worked there, I was nervous that something like that would happen again. Luckily, there were no more break-ins. I'm not sure who exactly broke in that one night, and I never heard that much more about it. For a while, I worked as a janitor at a university. The college was about average-sized, and there were several different buildings on campus. There were a few other janitors. We would all have certain buildings that we were assigned to clean. That would change as well, so basically I would just do as I was told. When I worked, it would mostly be the afternoon into the night. I would get off at like 10 or 11 p.m. oftentimes. One night, I was working in one of the buildings that had classrooms in it. It was at the west end of campus, sort of on the edge. I got inside the building in the evening, after all the classes for the day were completed. There were still a few students around studying and such, but not very many. As the night went on, there would be less and less. Most of the time, things were very similar from one building to the other. I started cleaning some of the classrooms, and it would take me a while. By probably 9 o'clock at night, there was nobody there at all. I had cleaned quite a bit, and I was just going to finish in the building and then be done. I had about 2 classrooms left. Now, the building has several different hallways, lounge areas for studying, and then offices. I was making my way down one hallway when I heard footsteps up ahead in the distance. They were going to the direction of the classrooms I was going to be cleaning, and I was walking towards them. As I did, I saw a man walk into my view from around the hallway. Then he kept going. Soon he went out of my sight. I didn't think too much of it because he was a long ways ahead of me, and I assumed that he was just a student. It was unusual for people to be here so late, but he was probably just doing some late-night studying. So I kept going to the classroom that I was going to work in, and I arrived about a minute or 2 later. When I opened the door and went inside, the lights were on. After turning them on, the room appeared to be completely empty. I had my cleaning cart with me with lots of supplies. I began taking some things and was going to start working. Out of nowhere though, I heard a noise coming from my left. I looked over and saw that there was a man running towards me at full speed. It was the guy that I had seen just minutes earlier, and now he was aggressively charging me. I barely had any time to react. The only thing that I was able to do was move back and try to get to the door. As I was doing this, the man reached me. I felt him grabbing at my arm, and then he hit my back a little as I was moving away. Then he crashed into my cleaning cart, knocking it over. The man fell over as well. I was able to get away from him and leave the classroom, but I could see that he was getting up to chase after me. I ran down the hallway and found a door that was a bathroom. I got inside quickly and then locked it. The man got there about 10 seconds later. Looking back, I should have tried to leave the building, but I wasn't very fast and thought that the man might catch me if I left. He tried opening the locked door and then started banging on it. Luckily, I had my cell phone on me and I dialed 911. As I got on the phone with the police, the man was still ruthlessly banging on the door. I didn't know what on earth his problem was. He continued to try to get in the door, and I didn't say anything at all. I was worried that the door would break, even though it was pretty strong. It seemed to be holding up pretty well, though. The man did not let up and continued. The more he hit it, the more the door seemed to shake. But I soon heard the sound of other people in the building, and I knew that it was the police. Before I knew it, they reached the man and stopped him from trying to get in. They left the building with him, and I came out to see several police officers standing around. I found out that the guy wasn't even a student at the university. I still don't know why he tried to attack me and then chased after me. I don't know what his problem was. Clearly, he was dangerous. He must have hidden the classroom, but I don't think he knew that I would go in there. Maybe he was mad at me for entering the room. I still don't know. But after that, I never had any experiences like that. I worked at that school for about another year, then I moved on. That was the most memorable moment from my time there. The story I'm about to share with you all started when I was a freshman in high school. I'd gotten to know a lot of kids. Met this one kid named TJ, who happened to be on the baseball and football team with me. Keep in mind, I had only known him for a few months. One day, sometime during the first few months of my freshman year, I decided to go to TJ's house. I went with my other friend, who I had known since I was young. We'll call him Finn. Key details to the story is I had been to TJ's house a few times before and slept over several times as well. His parents knew me, and my parents knew TJ's parents. When I got to TJ's house, we waited for Finn to get dropped off. When he did, we all decided to go to a nearby school, because some of TJ's friends were supposedly goofing off on the roof of the school. When TJ's friends he knew weren't there, we decided to walk to the other side of the neighborhood TJ lived in. To get to the other side of the neighborhood, we cut through a community college that was small. At this point, I did not know where we were going and asked TJ, but he didn't give me a response. My phone was about to die, and I told TJ this, and he said that I could charge it later. As we were halfway through the community college, we surprisingly ran into 5 friends of TJ's. 3 of them I had briefly met once before, and they were the type of people where bad follows them. The other 2 friends of TJ's were kids I had never seen before or met. I asked TJ where we were going, and he said one of his friend's house. I got a weird feeling, as my phone was dead at this point and it was dark out. I was walking when one of TJ's friends thought I was talking bad about his mom, but I hadn't said a word about his mom at all. Then TJ insisted that I did, and shortly after, TJ and his other friends insisted that we fought. Mind you, Finn, my good friend, did not say anything and stood there not knowing what to do. I've been in fights before and can hold my ground. One of TJ's friends at this point was circling me and got in my face and shoved me. I turned and his friend threw a punch at me and missed, and then I felt someone punch me with my back turned. I eventually tossed one of the guys to the ground and had him pinned, but the other guy then kicked at me. The guy I had pinned down was now on top of me and punched me, and one of my contacts fell out and I couldn't see. I finally got up and was bleeding from the eye when TJ and two of his friends insisted we go round two and started placing bets. I finally walked away, and as I was, TJ took a photo of me, and somebody else I guess had a video of the fight. Later on it got passed around everyone on the baseball team, and everybody was angry at TJ for not helping me. Anyways, we eventually walked back to TJ's house where Finn's mom was waiting to pick him up. The parents found out I was in a fight, but was more worried about TJ than me, and I was bleeding. My parents found out and were mad. We filed a police report on one of TJ's friends that basically assaulted me and attacked me. Days later, TJ was taken to a mental hospital because he allegedly wanted to come to school and shoot me in the back of the head in class. I took him to court for a restraining order, but the judge did not pass it and told us to make up and get over it. I realized I was lured into the dark area of the community college to most likely get harmed. Finn did not help me, and I haven't talked to him since. I blocked TJ on everything and haven't seen him since either. I hope TJ doesn't do this to anyone else again, but it's a lesson that you might not know a friend as well as you think. Now I was in high school. I used to ride the bus to and from school during my freshman and sophomore years. This happened during my sophomore year. I lived sort of at the end of a curving and quiet street. Most people who lived in my neighborhood had long driveways and large properties with lots of trees. The city that I lived in was pretty spread out and rural. The bus did not come down my street, so I had to walk down it and wait at the end. I was also the only person on my street to ride the bus. Generally, the bus would get there really early in the morning. I don't recall the exact time, but it would usually be dark out still when it picked me up. When I got dropped off after school, I would also have to walk the distance of my street. It was not so bad at all though, and the most annoying part was it was kind of unpredictable when the bus would get there in the morning. It would often be late, I remember, so I would be standing out waiting for a while sometimes. Other times it would get there right after I got to the corner. The location that I got picked up from was a busier road that mine connected to. It was usually pretty quiet though when I got picked up. One morning, I left my house and was walking down the street to wait for the bus. When I passed by one of the curves in the road, I saw what appeared to be a man just inside one of my neighbor's yards. I knew that he didn't live there, and he was behind one of the trees and I could barely see him. It appeared as though he was hiding, which I thought was really odd. I only looked at him for like a second, and then I just kept walking. I made it to the end of the street eventually, and the bus got there a very short time later. I was at school after that until I rode the bus home that afternoon. When I got dropped off at the corner, I started walking back to my house. I had forgotten all about the man that I'd seen earlier. But when I was passing by almost the same area, I saw him again. It was really strange. He was hanging out in the woods just off the road. In that area, it was pretty dense. It would be easy to hide in there. I wasn't sure what the guy was doing, but it looked very suspicious. I guess he could have been visiting one of the neighbors or something. But I was pretty sure that he didn't live here at all. I walked past trying to ignore it. He was somewhat visible, but also sort of blocked by tree branches. After making it past, I continued to walk and was a little more than halfway down the street to my house. I remember that when I made it farther, I looked back and noticed the man was now standing in the street. He was slowly starting to walk behind me. I hadn't known that he had even left the woods. It was really creepy to see. I was a long ways up from him though, so I wasn't too worried just yet. I kept walking, and when I made it to my driveway, looked again to see him still walking. It was about the same distance back though. The guy was just wearing jeans and a grey sweatshirt, and I never got that good of a look at his face. He appeared to have dark hair though. I quickly walked up my driveway, got out my keys, and went inside. When I was in, I felt a lot better and checked out the front window. The view of the street from there was partly obstructed by trees that we had in our yard. Still, I didn't see him at all. I was home alone for a while until my parents got home from work. During this time though, I didn't see the man at all. I ended up sort of forgetting about him as the day went on. The next morning, I left my house again to catch the bus. I walked on our street and in another woods area saw somebody walking through when I passed by. I immediately remembered the man and realized that it was him. I walked faster and passed by the area where he was. When I did, I didn't look over at all or tried to ignore him. I assumed that it would be a similar situation to the previous day. But this time, when I made it to the straight part of the road that led to my bus stop, I heard footsteps behind me. It was very quiet with it being so early, and I could hear him walking. I looked behind me and saw the guy maybe 100 feet back. He was walking in the middle of the street now. I walked faster and soon made it to where I would wait for the bus. I looked down the street but didn't see my bus coming. I really hoped that it would arrive before the man reached me, but today it seemed to be running late. As I impatiently waited, I looked over my shoulder. The man was still walking towards me, and now about 50 feet back. I couldn't wait any longer, and I went to the left. I walked along the side of the busy road, which had no sidewalk and really no place to walk at all. There was just a slim margin outside the road line. I walked along this road towards the other street a ways down, then I knew my bus went down before my road. It was a ways away, but I didn't know where else to go or what else to do. When I did this, I noticed the man start to follow me there as well. I walked faster and hoped that the guy wouldn't start running after me or something. For a couple more minutes, he seemed to maintain my speed and was like 50 feet back still. I walked along this road until I actually saw my bus up ahead. It was leaving the street that it went down before mine, and then turning onto the busier road that I was walking on. It was a great sight to see. I kept walking and then stopped and started waving for the bus. The bus stopped for me and I got on. When I did, I looked to see where the man was. He was in the ditch and disappeared into the woods, which was about 30 or 40 feet off the road. My bus driver looked confused, but I told him what happened. The man was gone now, but my driver agreed to drop me off in front of my house after school instead of at the corner. So after school, I was dropped off right in front of my driveway. As we drove down my street, I didn't notice the guy anyplace, but he could have easily been hiding in the woods again. I was able to make it inside safely. When my parents got home, I told them about it. They called the police, and I remember that the neighborhood was searched, but unfortunately, the man was gone by that point. None of the neighbors knew who he was either. After that, my bus would pick me up in front of my driveway and drop me off in front of it as well. Luckily, I never saw the guy again after that. I'm a female, and this happened when I was in high school. My friends and I used to like to go to the high school football games on Friday nights. We would watch our friends play in the game, and there was a really large student section in the bleachers. It was always a good time, and then I would often hang out with my friends afterwards. One time, I went with two of my friends to a high school football home game. Where I'm from, the high school football games are always a huge deal. Just about the entire city shows up, and it's always packed. Plus, our team is usually pretty good. We got there early and went into the student section. During the game, we mostly stayed there, but a couple of times we got up and walked around. It was very crowded. After the game, we hung around for a little while, and then we were going to leave to go to one of my friends' houses. Then we were going to spend the night there. She lived about 10 minutes away from the school. I was driving, so we got into my car and then started to leave. There was a lot of traffic and a big traffic jam. It took probably 10 minutes just to get off of the main street. Once we were, though, it was smooth sailing. But we noticed that there was a car driving right behind us. When we turned, the car turned after us. We automatically assumed that it was one of our friends from school being funny. None of us could tell who it was, though, because it was dark out. We were trying to guess, but I honestly didn't recognize the car at all. It was just a normal sedan, but kind of small and was black. It stayed behind us for a while, and then we turned, and it turned right after us. It continued to stay right on our tail until we arrived on my friend's street. I drove to a house and pulled over on the side of the road in front of it. The car pulled over behind us. I was actually really surprised that the car followed us all the way back. We were all still convinced at this point that it was a classmate, though. High school kids will do some crazy things sometimes just for a laugh or whatever. So after we parked, we started to get out of the car. I remember getting out and starting to walk over to the car to see who it was. But then the driver's door opened, and I saw a man start to get out. He was no high school kid. This guy was at least 30, and I had never seen him before. Suddenly, I had a really bad feeling, and I think the rest of my friends did too. Instead of trying to run inside or anything, all three of us got back in my car at once. The guy was still walking towards us. I locked all the doors, and the man arrived at one of the back doors and tried opening it. When he did, I slammed my foot on the gas and drove away. My friends told me that he was going back to his car in a hurry. I drove about as fast as I could on that residential road. I went around a corner, and then there was this park with a path through it. I slammed on my brakes, slowed down, and then turned onto the path. It was not a street, and cars were not supposed to go on it, but it was wide enough that one could. I don't know how I got this idea, but I just did, and I drove down the path. The park was not very big, and obviously nobody was there with it being late at night. I cut through this path to the other side, where it connected to a street in another nearby neighborhood. Then I took a left, and we could no longer see the guy. He would have no idea where we were going at that point. I drove back to my house after that. We hung out there for a little while, until finally we went back to my friend's place. That made for the craziest high school football game experience I ever had. When I was in high school, I considered myself to be a pretty easygoing guy. I had a good friend group, which I would hang out with sometimes. But I remember that a new kid came into our school my junior year. His name was Brad, and I didn't like him at all from the start. He just seemed like an arrogant guy with a really short attention span. I also had 2 classes with him. I just remember always seeing him on his phone during class, and the teacher would get mad at him about it. He seemed to not care about class at all, and also skipped a lot. The few times that I was around him because of a group project that I got put in with him, he did none of the work. He was always making excuses and stuff. And one time, he even said that he couldn't do any work that day because his vape broke. I thought he was joking, but he actually did nothing the entire time that day. So anyways, I tried to avoid him for the most part, but he somehow became friends with some of the guys in my friend group. So I ended up hanging out with him in a group setting like twice. I didn't know he would be there, and he was being annoying the whole time like always. Literally the first time I was hanging out with my friends and he was there in the lunchroom, he made fun of my shoes. They were just average Nike athletic shoes, but a little worn. I didn't care what he thought, but it seemed like he was just trying to roast me to impress my friends or something. So clearly we didn't get along. Then we ended up actually getting into it a little bit during gym class one day. We were playing floor hockey and I was the goalie and he was on the other team. He basically picked up the goal and moved it to try to score. So then I picked up the goal and I threw it. And then he started getting in my face and some other kids held him back. It was more about the fact that we didn't like each other than we really cared about a gym class game. But I remember not long after this incident, one of my friends told me that Brad really hated me. I already had a hunch and I said that I didn't like him either one bit. I tried to stay away from him, but sometimes it was hard with us having classes together and mutual friends. I didn't know why any of my friends spent time with him anyways. But one night, I was at home when one of my friends, Jamie, texted me saying he needed a ride. He told me that he was at the high school and told me to come to Lower Lawn. I didn't really want to go at first, but he told me he would buy me Taco Bell if I did. The school was a little less than 10 minutes away, so it wasn't that big of a deal. I told my parents I had to give Jamie a ride home, then I left. I think it was about 8:30 p.m. or maybe 9 at this point. I drove to Lower Lot, which was sort of far from the school, but you didn't need a pass to park there. I pulled in and saw one other car in the parking lot. After parking in one of the spaces, I didn't see Jamie anywhere though. I texted him asking where he was. When I did this, I heard someone talking from my left. I looked over and saw Brad there. He was telling me to get out of my car. I was so annoyed to see him, but I wanted to know what he wanted, so I got out of my car. After I was out, his tone changed even more. He walked up really fast and got in my face. It was clear that he wanted to fight me, and he pushed me a little. I told Brad I didn't want to fight him. I was just there to pick up my friend. But after he shoved me, I pushed him back a little. Right after that, though, I saw somebody else emerge from behind what I assumed was Brad's car. It was the only other car in the parking lot. I had no idea who this guy was, but I gathered that he was a friend of Brad. He didn't go to our school, though. This guy started walking towards me and cussing me out. Now, this wasn't fair. If Brad wanted to fight me, that's one thing. But don't bring your friend, so it's 2-on-1. I asked who this guy was, and Brad's friend then came up and shoved me. I took one swing at Brad, and then his friend went around and hit me from behind. I fell to the ground, and Brad kicked me in the leg when I was down. After that, I got up as fast as I could and started running off. They immediately started chasing after me. I was a lot faster than they were, though. I ran into a grassy area next to the high school, and then off school property into a woods. The entire time, I heard them chasing after me, but I was pulling away. After running into the woods, it got very dark. I couldn't see much, but I kept going through trees and heard Brad and his friend reach the edge of the woods. The woods was getting pretty thick, and they called for me to come out, but did not seem to enter the woods themselves. I waited in there for a while and hid behind a tree. After about 5 minutes, I left the woods and didn't see them. I'm not sure where they went, but I went back to the parking lot and both cars were still there. I went back to mine and then I drove home. After getting back, I texted Jamie and cussed him out. He claimed that he didn't know Brad wanted to fight me, and also claimed that he didn't know Brad's friend. He told me Brad told him to say what he did, because Brad really wanted to talk to me and I wouldn't respond to him. It was a lie because Brad never reached out to me at all. I do believe Jamie, but it was still messed up for him to say that to me. Over the next few days, I didn't see Brad at all. He wasn't in classes, and I was happy about that. In fact, I never saw him again after that. He didn't show up to class anymore at all. I'm not sure if he just kept skipping class until he got expelled or if he changed schools again. Either way, I'm glad I don't have to see him anymore. When I was in high school, I was really into sports. I played on the football, basketball, and baseball teams. This took place during my senior year and after a basketball game one night. I loved weightlifting. I would work out in the school weight room all the time. I remember we had a basketball game at 7 that night, which ended at about 9 p.m. After the game, my coach would always stick around for a while in his office. On this night, we went back to the locker room and coach talked to us like always. I remember that we won the game, and after coach was done, guys started changing and leaving. I told coach that I was going to go lift, and he said that was fine. So I left the locker room and then went over to the weight room. It was kind of on the other side of the school though, in another wing. The weight room was kind of tucked away, and he had to walk past these janitor's closets to get there. So I went inside the weight room and started lifting. It was nice because it was just me all by myself in there. I was really focused on getting in as good of shape as I could at that point, because I was going to be playing football in college the next year. So I worked out in there for probably 40 minutes or so. Then I was going to go back to the locker room, shower, and drive home. By now, everybody in the school was gone, except for my coach and the night janitors. I believe there was 2 overnight janitors, and I knew who both of them were because of my many late nights at the school. After exiting the weight room, I passed by one of the janitor's closets. I'm not sure why, but I looked in. I saw what appeared to be a man hiding inside, sort of behind some stuff. After passing it, I stopped where I was and was thinking, did I really just see that? I almost went back to look, but realized whoever this guy was would know that I saw him then. So I decided to just keep walking instead. I was going to find one of the night janitors and let them know that I saw a guy hiding in one of their closets. The locker room was still a ways away, which was also where the coach's office was. But before I was even out of the first hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. I knew it was the guy who I had seen, but I had no clue as to who he was. The school was completely silent by this time, so I easily heard the guy walking behind me. I reached the end of that hallway and then took a right. Then when I was going down that hallway, I continued to hear the guy behind me. I couldn't seem to find any of the janitors, and whoever was following me was starting to get closer. At that point, I decided to just leave. I walked down another hallway to the closest exit. When I got there, I left the school. After making it outside, the man behind me did not follow, I had to walk all the way around the school to the side door, but that was also locked. Luckily, I had my phone and I called my coach and told him what happened. He came to the side doors and let me in. Then I was able to get back to the locker room and change and get my stuff. My coach told me he would go to see who the guy was in the school and that I should just go home. So I left. After that though, I never heard what ended up happening. Maybe the guy left the school as well. Not sure what he was doing in there. I'm not sure what he was doing in there or why he was following me. In my mid-20s, I had a very odd period of my life where I didn't have anywhere to stay and wasn't making enough money to live somewhere on my own. I was fresh out of college and was running out of time to move out of the dorms. All of my friends from school were just moving back in with their parents or leaving town, so it left me in a bad spot. I needed to find a cheap place and a roommate to split the bills with. As time was getting scarily close to me needing to move, an ad popped up on a renting website. It was posted by a man named Xander, listing the ad as a search for a roommate to move into the house he was renting. I checked the rest of the post, seeing it was a relatively small house, which likely meant it would be cheap too. I replied to the ad, and later that day Xander called me. We set up a tour and agreed on a price, and I ended up moving in. Though basically having to move, I still didn't think it was a bad place. Xander and I got along well. He had also just graduated, so we were both on the same page, and it was actually kind of refreshing to have a friend in a similar position. The house itself, though, wasn't the best. It only had a single bedroom, so my room was the living room. It was better than nothing, though, and I was out working most of the time anyway. After a week or so of living there, having just fully settled in, it was the middle of the night and I was sleeping in my living room when I heard the front door open. I looked up and saw Xander walking in. He looked over at me, but I don't think he noticed I was awake because he walked right past and down the hall to his room. I heard him move something around, but then he came back out. He walked down to the front door again, this time stopping and turning to face me. Xander stood there and looked at me for a good 5 to 10 seconds before going back outside. Something about the way he was acting made me really uncomfortable. A few minutes went by before I heard some movement outside the front door. When it opened, I closed my eyes so that he wouldn't notice I was awake. He came in and shut the door, then walked slowly down the hallway, breathing heavily. As he got to the end, I opened my eyes slightly, catching a glimpse of Xander holding what looked like a body in his arms. He moved into his room quickly and shut the door. I was almost so in shock that I wondered if what I saw was even real. I came up with every possibility, like maybe he was out partying and the body was just some passed out drunk person needing a place to sleep. I sat up and quietly walked closer to his room to try and hear what he was doing. As I listened to him continually moving around, the worry about what he was up to started to overcome me. After thinking about it, I knocked on his door. All the movement stopped instantly and was followed by multiple seconds of silence. Before he walked over, I heard the lock click and then he cracked the door open, only enough for me to see a sliver of his face. He started apologizing for waking me and said he was just rearranging some things. After hearing him lie, I figured I'd just straight up ask, "What were you holding when you just came in? Was that person okay?" His face straightened and he had a look in his eyes I'd never seen before. He didn't answer. We held eye contact as things got increasingly more intense. Then I quickly slammed my body into the door, knocking Xander back and revealing a lifeless body slouched up in the corner of his room. He shoved me out and locked the door behind me, but I'd already seen enough. I ran back and got my phone, then left the house and called the police. Xander made no attempts to run or hide, but unfortunately, it was too late. The body was completely lifeless and had been so for multiple hours. The details of everything else were withheld, but I know he lied about his age, being almost 30 years old. and I also know he remains in prison to this day. He still has kept to himself about why he did it and what he was doing with the body. I consider myself lucky, though, to have gotten out of that situation quickly, because if I hadn't, who knows where I'd be. This summer in late June, I moved from my apartment into a quaint little home on the outskirts of my city. I was familiar with the area and had been eyeing the house market for a while, hoping to finally leave my apartment and purchase a home. This one was older and needed some work, but the price and location were great. It was a mile down, just off the highway, mostly with trees and grass around, but there were a few neighbors within sight as well. The day I moved in, I drove the U-Haul down to the house, and while I was unloading, I noticed someone watching me. They were standing really far off toward the tree line, or were facing me and just watching as I moved in. Being so far away, though, I didn't see much harm in it. I just found it to be kind of creepy. I forgot about them for a while, focusing on getting everything inside the house before dark. I finished around 6, just as the sun was starting to set. With time to spare, I went back outside and locked up the back of the U-Haul, then got in to drive it back and drop it off. When I turned the truck on and started driving, though, I noticed that person again, now closer to the road but still near the trees. When I passed them, I watched as their head turned, following the truck with their gaze as I drove away. During my drive to the U-Haul shop, I got a strange feeling in my gut. Just that something was really off about that guy, and maybe he wasn't so innocent. I turned in the truck and ordered an Uber back, keeping my eye out as we drove down the driveway. And although it was probably too dark by now, I'll still note that I didn't see him anywhere. I got out and went inside, turning on the lights and feeling overwhelmed by the amount of boxes and furniture stacked all throughout the house. It was just past 6:30, so I took a dinner break, then got to unpacking. I spent the whole night organizing what needed to go in storage and what needed to be unpacked. Once I had the pile of boxes for storage, I started taking them up to the attic. I pulled the ladder down, then carefully climbed up with one hand as I hauled the box up. When I got up there, it was pitch black, but I could barely see the light bulb, reflecting a bit of light from downstairs. I walked over and pulled the string to turn it on, but it was really dim and didn't light up more than a couple feet around. I set the box down and pushed it up against the wall, then went back down the ladder and into the kitchen where I'd piled up my other storage boxes. I picked up another, then as I walked over to the stairs, I heard the sound of metal shaking from the upstairs hallway. It was the clear sound of someone climbing down the ladder. I looked up the staircase, and just a moment later, a man appeared at the top, looking down at me. He started running down the stairs at full speed, and I turned to get out through the front door. I could hear his footsteps coming up behind me as I ran over to my car, getting in and locking the doors as he slammed up against it and tried to open it. After a few failed attempts, he tried to punch the window a couple times, then took off running toward the tree line. I was absolutely terrified, but managed to call the cops. Of course, they didn't find too much. I guessed he might have been staying in the attic for a few days, based on a few blankets that were up there. I don't know the truth and likely never will, but just thinking about how I was up in the attic as he was hiding somewhere in the dark just a few feet from me is terrifying. And he did chase me afterward, so I'm pretty sure he wasn't a harmless person hiding out. But what he would have done to me had he caught me is a question that I don't want answered. I lived in the same house for my entire life, all the way from childhood through high school, and even most of college. So when I moved out during my last year of school, it was really weird to be in a different place. I'd rented out an extremely small single-bedroom house on the other side of town, and even though the change of environment was different for me, I still really liked it. On day one, I got a van and moved all my stuff into the new place. I didn't unpack really at all. I just set all the boxes down in the main room and chilled for the rest of the night. The whole process of finding a place, contacting the owners, signing papers, all of it just had me exhausted, and it felt good to be done with all the hard parts of it. I hooked up the TV and stood it up on a few sturdy boxes, then turned on a show to watch. It was probably about 7 o'clock, so it was too early for bed, but as I sat there and watched with half-open eyes, at some point I began hearing two people talking outside. I lowered the volume on the TV and listened, hearing it sound like they were right outside my house, but they were talking quietly, and whatever they were saying was too hard to make out. I got up and walked over to one of the windows, pulling the curtain back a little. But as soon as I did, a figure quickly moved past it from outside. I jumped back a bit, getting startled by them being so close so suddenly. The voices had stopped speaking by now, but I could hear a set of footsteps quickly going around the house, and then that suddenly stopped too. Just like that, it was completely quiet again. I checked a few more windows before getting back to the couch and continuing with my show. I was sure I was just being paranoid about living alone for the first time in a new environment, and I knew the neighbors' houses were really close, so I assumed it was just them walking around. I sat there for a while and eventually laid down as I started getting sleepy, dozing off around 10. When I woke up, the house was completely dark, with the only light coming from the TV screen. I looked at my phone and saw it was 2 a.m. So I shut off the TV and laid back down. But just as I was about to close my eyes, a soft creak echoed through the floorboards from across the room. I immediately shifted my eyes toward the sound. Standing in the doorway across the hall, a figure was staring at me. His eyes were wide open, peering at me with half of his body hiding behind the door frame. My eyes were locked on them for the longest few seconds of my life before they sprinted out of the doorway and down the unlit hallway. Immediately after, another set of footsteps on the other side of the house ran in the same direction. There were a few soft thuds, then silence. The house was still fully dark, making the entire thing even more terrifying. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I was in the odd state of panic, while also being frozen in place. When I collected myself, I dialed 911, telling them what happened in between my shaky breaths. While still on the line with the officer, I got up and turned on the light. Through the hallway were scuffed shoe prints going up and down multiple times. Then I turned around and looked back at the living room where I was sleeping, and all over the carpet were more dirty shoe prints, some even getting within just a few feet of where I was sleeping. When cops showed up, they searched around and took a few samples, but they didn't get any hard evidence. Even more unnerving though, they still aren't sure how the intruders got inside or outside the house. I told them about the thuds I heard from the back of the house as they left, but the windows in that area of the house were still locked. I don't know if they had some way of unlocking and locking them from outside, but that had to be it. While the amount of shoe prints showed they likely had been inside for a long time, going through each room multiple times over, nothing ever showed up missing. They never showed any signs of wanting to harm me either. But it all just horrifies me to think about why they broke in. Maybe they were looking for someone else. Whatever the case was, it's been over 2 years now, and they have never come back. I had a really weird experience when I used to work at a dollar store. The store was called Family Dollar, and I lived only a few blocks away in an apartment. I had a few co-workers at the Family Dollar, but this story revolves around one in particular. It was a guy named Chris. He was a big guy and around my age. Sometimes we would work at the same time, and usually only 2 or 3 of us would be working at once. However, Chris didn't really seem to be much of a talker. Neither was I for that matter, but I actually talked with him a couple of times, and he just gave really short responses. We worked together for probably 2 months or so, on and off. One night, I was working with somebody else, and Chris was not there. It was a fairly quiet night on the job, and everything went by normal. After I got off of work, I went back home to my apartment. My apartment was pretty close, like I said, and I lived alone in my place on the second floor of the building. By the time I got back, it was maybe 9:30 or so. I did not have to be up early the next day, and I ended up staying up sort of late. So, at about midnight, I was still awake and in my living room. There was a sudden knock on the front door. It was a loud and firm knock, and it startled me. I sat up, and suddenly my heart was racing. Why would somebody knock on my door at midnight? I really wasn't expecting it. I got up and walked over, and in the process, heard another knock. When I arrived at my door, I looked through my peephole to the other side before answering. My coworker Chris was standing there. It was very strange to see him, because I knew that he didn't live in this building. I also never told him where I lived before. He was just standing there, facing my door and looking at it. I chose not to answer. It was just too weird. I kept watching though, and he stood there for maybe 5 minutes at least. Then, finally, he left and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. I was left wondering why on earth he had been there in the first place. I knew that I had never invited him over or even told him my address. Well, the next day, I worked, and I just happened to work with Chris. Not too long into the shift, when things were sort of quiet, I asked him why he went to my apartment the previous night. Chris completely denied it. I said I literally saw him standing right outside of my door the previous night. He said he wasn't there and had stayed home. He even went so far as to claim that either someone who looked like him was there or that I dreamed the whole thing. I knew that was a lie. I just kind of said whatever and then moved on with work. The rest of the shift went by as normal, and I didn't talk to him at all. After that, I never saw Chris at work again. I found out that he quit, but I didn't get a reason why. I found the timing of it very suspicious. I haven't seen him since then, and I still wonder what he was doing that night. A few years back, I worked at a dollar store in my city. It was like 5 minutes away from my apartment, and I worked as a cashier. After having the job for several months, I was working one night like any other. Usually, we had 1 or 2 employees working at once because the store was small. I was by myself on this night, and it was maybe 4 or 5 p.m. There were about 2 or 3 customers in the store at once on average. I remember that a man walked in as I stood behind the counter of one of the 2 check lanes that we had. After he walked inside, he went down one of the first aisles and disappeared. Another customer came and checked out about a minute later. Probably 20 minutes or so later, the man checked out. He came up to me and set down just 1 drink. I don't remember exactly what it was. The man had long hair and was wearing sunglasses, I remember. After he paid, he left the store. The interaction was really nothing out of the ordinary. He didn't say much at all, if anything, to me. I remember that after he left the store, he was hanging around by the front for a while. I could see out of the front window to the sidewalk out front and a bit of the parking lot. We were also connected to some other businesses as part of a strip mall. None of the businesses ever seemed to be all that busy though. So I kept working, and every now and then would see the guy. He was just kind of hanging out on the sidewalk out front. I didn't really think too much of it though. I checked out some more customers and people would come and go from the store, but the man remained out front. Eventually, hours went by. Soon it was nighttime and the store got even quieter. I noticed that the guy was still standing out front. What was he doing here for so long? I really didn't know, but I also didn't really care that much. Sometimes he would look over in the window, and I thought he might come back in the store, but he didn't. Only 1 or 2 more customers came in for the rest of the time that we were open. Then it was time for me to close up and leave. I'd been working by myself that day because business was slow. When it was 9 o'clock, I locked the doors and saw the guy look over when I did. Then I clocked out, did a few last-minute things, and left the store by probably 9:15. After walking out, the guy was still standing there, about 15 feet to my right. I went to my car in the parking lot and got inside. Then I started driving back home. I needed to get gas though, and I stopped about halfway back. I went to a smaller neighborhood gas station on a corner. When I got there, I got out of my car and started filling it with gas. About a minute into doing that, and I saw this older beat-up looking car enter the gas station. The car was blue and also pretty small. It did not drive to a gas pump, but instead parked in one of the few spaces that was on the side. I happened to notice the driver and realized that it was the same guy from the dollar store, the man with long hair and sunglasses. Now, at first, I thought this was just a coincidence, because the gas station wasn't that far away from the dollar store. But still, it was kind of weird. I mean, this guy was standing around outside for hours, and then when I left, he leaves. When my gas tank was full, I decided to go inside of the gas station. I was just going to get something to eat to have when I got home. The man was still inside of his car at this point and just sitting there. I left my car and walked inside the store. I was browsing around looking for something and noticed the same man walking in. Now I was worried. It seemed a little too strange for this guy to suddenly come inside the store now that I did. I left right there, not even bothering to buy anything. When I did, I saw the guy start to walk out after me. I quickly hurried to my car, started the engine, and drove away. As I was getting out of the parking lot, I saw the guy getting inside of his car. I quickly turned down one of the residential streets and turned my headlights off. It was hard to see, but I went down that street and then took a left. The guy would have no way of knowing where I went. He didn't follow me, probably because he couldn't see me. So after that, I was able to drive home, and I made it back okay. After that night, I didn't see the guy for the rest of the time that I worked at the dollar store. Not sure why he did what he did that night, but it was very strange. For a little bit of background, I will mention that I'm a female, and this took place last year. I was shopping at a dollar store called Dollar Tree. I don't go to Dollar Trees very often, but on this night, I did it. It was probably around 7:30 p.m. or so. When I got inside, the store was very quiet. I only saw a couple of other shoppers, maybe one employee around the store. I shopped around and got a few things, and then went to the front to check out. Working at the check lane was a man that had dark hair that was somewhat short. This man was also kind of short, and when he scanned my items, he was making comments on all of them. He was saying stuff like, "What's this for?" Overall, it was slightly annoying, but not a huge deal. After checking out, I remembered that the guy said, "Well, now I'm off," and he turned off the light to his check lane. I was just like, "Oh, that's cool," and I started to leave. But the guy kept walking with me as I was leaving. He asked me where I was going after this, and I just said home. Then he started talking to me and walking with me as we left the store. It was really weird and something that I was not expecting at all. As we were walking through the parking lot, the man asked me to go with him. I asked him what he meant, and he was like, "What did I just say? Do you want to go with me? My car's right there." I said no thanks, but he continued to walk with me. When I got to my car, he was still there, and I said that I'd better be going. Then I unlocked my car door and started to open it. The very instant that I did though, the man grabbed the door, forcing it open some more. Then he appeared to try to force his way inside. I knew there was no chance I would be able to get in and drive away from him or anything. So I just turned and ran away from there. I still had the keys in my hand, luckily, so he wouldn't be able to steal my car or anything. The man started chasing after me, but I had a good 10-foot head start on him at least. The dollar store was part of a larger strip mall, which had at least 5 other stores in it. I sprinted up towards one of the other ones. When I was about halfway there, I could tell that the man was running behind me, but I didn't look. I made it to a Target department store, which was on the end of the strip mall. When I made it there, the man was no longer following me. I went inside of the store and called the police when I was safely inside. Then I waited for them to get there. It took about 5 minutes. When the police were there, I went back out to my car with them, but the man was gone. He had left, and I told the police the whole story. Fortunately, they went inside the dollar store and spoke with the other employee who was still working there. They knew who the man was, and the police were able to locate him pretty soon after. I was really glad that they found him. That man was such a creep, and I feel very lucky to have gotten away from him. This occurred several months ago when I was shopping at a dollar store. I had gone to the local dollar store by my house just to get a few items. It's always a quick and easy in and out there because the store is usually not that busy. On this night in particular, there were a few more people than usual, but still far less than the nearest grocery store. I walked in and grabbed a basket and started going down the aisles. I was in probably the second one when I noticed this one man walking past me. The reason I took notice was because he was walking really fast. He too was holding a shopping basket and it had several items in it. The man looked sort of dirty. He had a very short haircut, but was wearing old baggy jeans and a t-shirt that was ripped. He was also wearing socks with flip-flops. He whizzed past me, and then I heard him go into the next aisle. I looked to my left and soon saw him zoom past and go into another aisle. It seemed like the guy was trying to speed run a shopping trip through the entire store. I just went back to my shopping and didn't notice him for several minutes. I think that I was in the next aisle when I heard the man approaching again. I knew it was him because I heard him flip-flopping really fast around the corner. He came into my aisle and walked right up to me, then stopped. When he did, he asked me if I could pay for his basket. I looked down and saw it now overflowing with a bunch of random items. "Sorry, but no," I said to him. Then he turned and zoomed off, going away from me. I heard him go into the next aisle over and ask the same question to somebody else. They also declined, and then he walked away from them. I wondered why the guy was doing that, but I returned to my shopping. But maybe 5 minutes after that, I was still shopping, and the guy approached me again. This time, I was in a more open area between a few aisles. He asked me once more to pay for his basket. This time, he seemed almost angry, and the way he said it was almost a threatening way. I said no again. The man then dumped his entire basket onto the ground. All of the items scattered, and then he said loudly, "What's your problem, man?" I was thinking that the guy must be on some kind of drugs or something. He then started repeating himself, asking what my problem was. But each time that he did, he got louder and louder. Soon, he was yelling. Some people inside started to take notice. I didn't really say anything and just tried to walk away. He followed me as I did, though. I asked him to leave me alone, which only caused him to ask me what my problem was again. He just kept saying, "What's your problem, man?" This went on for more than a minute. Soon, an employee approached us and asked the man to quiet down. He refused, saying that he would not, and the employee told him that he had to leave. At first, the man said no, but then he changed his mind. He said fine and then started walking away. I think that everybody in the vicinity did a sigh of relief when they heard that. But before leaving, the man stopped and then took off his flip-flops and socks. He then threw them in my direction, thankfully missing me. Then he turned and left the store. After he was gone, somebody said to call the police. The guy was gone now though, so I don't think anybody did. I finished my shopping, checked out, and left. Luckily, I didn't see the guy again after that. It made for my craziest trip to the dollar store by far. This one incident still haunts me to this day. I'm a 22-year-old female, but this happened when I was 18. I still haven't moved out and I was living with my family. It was my sister Judy's 16th birthday. Judy wanted to stay at a hotel and celebrate with her friends. My parents didn't want her to go alone, so we all planned for a staycation in a countryside hotel. My dad was taking care of the entire accommodation of 7 to 8 people, so we could afford a 3-star hotel. The decor and the condition were quite good, and the staff was also helpful. When we checked in, we got into the rooms on a 3rd floor. We ate later that day, and Judy went for a walk at the riverbed nearby with her friends. I wanted to have some time for myself, so I decided to stay back. I was reading in my room when my mom called me and asked if I can go to the front desk to get some more pillows for my sister's friends. As much as I hated these unwanted chores, I didn't refuse my mom. I grabbed my room key and started walking all the way out to the elevator. The corridor was empty and dimly lit. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the man until he moved into the corner. Yes, a man was sitting on the floor, mumbling some gibberish. He had a small dump of pebbles in front of him that he was counting in a very creepy way. His hair was all shaggy, and the coat he wore had a very strong smell, somewhat like a goat. As I silently walked past him, he lifted his head and smiled at me, flashing his bloodshot eyes. It took me only a second to figure out that this dude was Milky Way high. I ignored him and got into the elevator. He watched me without even blinking as the elevator door closed. I grabbed the pillow from the dash and went back to the elevator. On the way up, my heart was beating fast. I expected the man to be gone, but as soon as the elevator door opened, I found him in the same spot. He was sitting there, humming creepily while rocking his body back and forth. I started walking down the hallway. I had a gut feeling to turn around. As I did, I saw that the man had started to follow me. I panicked and started to walk faster down the hall. He was chuckling weirdly while looking straight into my soul. His senseless rant was scaring the crap out of me. I felt like he was chanting some spells or something. My survival instincts kicked in, and instead of stopping in front of Judy's room, I rushed straight to my parents'. I expected the door to be open, but I twisted the doorknob and realized my parents were enjoying their alone time. But the man did not stop following me yet, so I started panicking and kicking the door. It was embarrassing to ruin my parents' privacy, but what choice did I have? The man kept walking towards me, stretching his arms out like he was dying to touch me. His long, sharp fingernails were filled with dirt. Seeing my parents were taking their time opening the door, I could not stay put. I started screaming, "Dad, open the door! Dad, please just open the door!" The moment I called out to my dad, the creepy behavior changed. He looked away from me, then slowly tilted his head to the right. His left eye twitched, and then he said out loud, "Oh, Dad." There was disbelief in his voice, as if he expected me to be alone in this hotel. What he did after will be forever imprinted on my memory. He started backing away, but not in the usual way. He didn't turn around. He didn't run. He just slowly started backing away while watching me the entire time. Finally, my dad opened the door, and I started crying. I was too old to cry like that, but my dad understood something very serious was happening. He took me in and my mom gave me water to calm me down. Once I contained myself and told my parents everything. My dad went to go look for him, but after searching the entire floor, they didn't find him. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night, but whenever I closed my eyes, I swear I could see the man crouched down in the corner of my room, chuckling at me. The next morning when I woke up, I went down for breakfast, and I saw 2 cop cars parked outside the hotel entrance. My dad was talking to a tall, handsome officer. When he saw me, he called out to me. My dad asked me to tell the officers about the man from last night. So far, we believe that the man was probably some homeless addict and needed to sneak inside a hotel by what the cops told me. But what the cops told me afterwards sent shivers down my spine. A family staying on the ground floor has filed for a missing person report this morning. Their 7-year-old daughter left their room to get some M&Ms from a vending machine last night, but never returned. The couple must have thought that the daughter had wandered off and got lost, so they contacted the front desk and asked them to check the footage of the front gate security camera. In a footage of 4 a.m., the same man from last night could be seen carrying the little girl on his shoulder and walking past the gate. The girl seemed like she was sleeping, but the police suspect that she was knocked out unconscious. I gave the cops all the information I could about the man, but sadly they never found him or the girl ever again. Just be careful where you meet a stranger. I'm a student from Iloilo, a city in the Philippines. Ivor, though, is a clean, wonderful city where hardly any crime takes place. We live in the suburbs as my dad and my uncle run a farm together. It was Sunday afternoon. I was watching over my niece and nephew at my uncle's house. Our family went to this farmer fair happening in the city to sell our dairy products and other harvests. My niece and nephew were about 6 and 8 years old, and I had a lot of fun being around them. We were watching TV in the living room when I got a call from my dad. He said that he had a flat tire on their way home and would be stuck on the highway until any help arrived. I assured him that I'd make dinner for the kids and myself so that he had nothing to worry about. Around 5:30, when the sunlight was almost gone, I went to the kitchen to prepare some rice and chicken. My uncle had this big chicken coop in the backyard, so eggs and chicken were the two most common ingredients in every meal. I drained the rice and insert the chicken legs to boil in a broth when I noticed the bush outside the kitchen window was moving. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the second time it moved, I felt weird. Bushes only move like this when a rabbit or raccoon was hiding in it. I ignored thinking about it and went back to my meal prep. Once I was done cooking, my nephew asked me for some scrambled eggs. I checked the fridge and realized that all the eggs were taken to the fair for sale. I love my niece and nephew a lot, so I didn't want to say no to their face. I told them to stay inside and play video games till I went to the chicken coop and came back with some fresh eggs. Being the sweet little munchkins they were, they nodded their tiny heads and waited for me. There was still some light outside, so I didn't need to take a flashlight with me. I stepped into the backyard from the back kitchen door, and as I stepped out of the kitchen coop, a rush of cold sweat dripped down my spine. I don't know why I felt like this, but something inside the coop just didn't feel welcoming to me. The coop was in darkness, and I regretted not bringing a flashlight with me. But I only needed like 3 or 4 eggs, so I decided to be quick and get it done with. I had to close the door behind me so the chickens didn't escape, but once I did that, I found myself standing in the stuffy room, highly scented with the smell of chicken poop and rotten hay, with a single ray of dying sunlight coming from the ventilator at the top. If you haven't been around chickens, then you probably don't know this. Even though they're pretty noisy birds once the sun sets, they all fall into this uncomfortable slumber and doze like some old grannies. So along the smell and darkness, the chicken's eerie silence made my overthinking mind run wild. All the horror movies I've watched so far kept flashing into my eyes. Just stop overthinking it and be a man. I kept saying this to myself. I slowly started to check the chickens' nests one by one. For 5 minutes I found nothing. I just kept grabbing all over the place. But then in the corner, with the help of dying sunlight, I spotted 3 eggs resting in an empty chicken nest. Thinking the chicken living there must have just gone on to another nest somewhere in the coop, I victoriously walked towards it to collect the eggs. But as I reached the dark corner, I heard the sound of heavy breathing. I stared into the pitch-black darkness, holding the 3 eggs in my hand. 1 second gone by, 2 seconds gone by, and then I saw 2 wide eyes open in the dark. Just a pair of 2 big eyes with red flames bursting from them. The sound of breathing got heavier as their eyes noticed me. I could feel my legs frozen to the ground, and no matter how much I wanted to run, I couldn't. I tried to scream for my niece and nephew, but nothing but a soft groan came out of my throat. And then I heard the sound of chewing. The eyes were still fixed on me, but I could tell the owner of the eyes was chewing on something. The crisp crackle echoed into a dead, silent tomb. I don't remember how long I was standing like that, staring into this vicious pair of eyes and hearing the crackle and chomp echo, when suddenly I heard my nephew's voice calling out to me. I can't let those kids be near whatever is hiding in the dark. I grasped the eggs so hard to my chest that they smashed and broke with pressure. When I ran and came out of the coop, my niece pointed at my t-shirt and started laughing. I realized that I was drenched in egg yolk. I went inside the house and locked every single door and window. I didn't tell my niece and nephews about it, as for them not to panic, because I would do anything to protect them. I told them to shush for a while as I turned off the television to see if I could hear any footsteps or rustling sounds, but I didn't. An hour later, our parents came back and I told my dad and uncle everything. They immediately went to the coop with flashlights and found a dead chicken laying in that corner. Its head was gone. Whatever was watching me in that coop chewed off its head and left the lifeless body of the poor bird. It's been 3 months since the incident. My uncle and dad have heightened the security around the farm so that no trespassers can enter without getting caught. Whatever was in that dark chicken coop, I pray that we never find out. I'm a 17-year-old male, and this happened last summer when I got into my senior year. My friend and I were working at a theater over the summer break as tech assistants. We were appointed to arrange the lighting for a show there. The show was a few days away, and we were in rehearsals. After hours of tiresome work, we got hungry and decided to order a pizza. We called our local pizza place asking for a large cheese pizza. But whoever answered the call sounded like an AI or some freakish robot that had just learned to talk. We honestly thought it was just a new feature introduced by this pizza place in taking orders. We continued ordering with the robot. It was kind of weird, but it was asking normal questions like the delivery address and things like that. Halfway through the call, I began hearing a silent noise of typing in the background. Someone was listening to my responses and typing them up. I didn't think much of it though, but looking back, I feel I should have. The robot told us the pizza would be delivered in approximately 17 minutes, which was very specific. Half an hour went by, and the pizza didn't reach our location. I dialed up the pizza place once again. I tried to call back the number, but somehow the call didn't go through, even after 3 and 4 tries. It was strange because I took it from their website. This is when things started to get very fishy. I called and nobody answered. I then called to a different number that appeared from a Google search, and this time a human voice spoke. I asked about the details of my order. Surprisingly, they said that they hadn't gotten a call within the last 45 minutes. My friend and I stared at each other, feeling confused, but then I thanked the guy on the other end of the phone and hung up. At this point, my friend was still going on about ordering a pizza when a number I hadn't seen before called me. I picked it up, and a suspicious-sounding man with a weird accent spoke to me. "Did you make an order for a large cheese pizza around 30 minutes ago?" I answered yes. The strange man asked me for the delivery address again. I hesitated for a second, but then gave him our location. I should never have done that. The man proceeded to tell me that the pizza would be delivered in 15 minutes. My friend and I weren't even sure if the pizza was going to come at that point. Also, I didn't even want it anymore. 2 hours later, the rehearsals were over, and the pizza still hadn't arrived. I blocked the number and decided to never pick up unknown calls again. After saying bye to my friend, I got in my car and headed home. My house was 20 minutes distance from the theater, so I was relieved that it wouldn't take long to get home. Around 5 minutes into my drive, I started noticing a car following me. It was a dark red car on the smaller side, with a sign that had the name of a pizza place on the top bonnet. I thought that maybe the car was just driving back to the pizza place after a delivery or something, as the restaurant was in the same direction I was headed to. But once I passed the turn to get past the pizza place, the red car passed it too. It just continued to follow me. I made a specific turn to get to my street, and the car made the same turn right after me. I was a little freaked out, but also annoyed. I stupidly pulled over to see if the car would do the same. And of course, it did. Clenching my car keys in my hand, I got out of my car. My heart was racing in a panic, but I wanted to find out what this dude's problem was. There was a creepy-looking man in the driver's seat of the red car. I walked over to his window, and he rolled it down to talk to me. I asked him why he was following me, and what did he want. He looked ragged and pretty effed up from his attire. The cheap scent of booze was all over him, and half his teeth were rotten. He looked blankly at me for a few moments, then leaned onto his back seat to grab something. I couldn't make out what it was, so I started to step back. I'd suspected it'd be a weapon, but instead, he brought out a pizza box. He showed me the box and asked, "Did you order this large cheese pizza? I have it right here for you." He kept staring at me up and down. This man sounded exactly like the suspicious call from earlier. I nodded my head saying no. He again asked, "Are you sure you didn't order this large cheese pizza?" The creepy emphasis on the term large and peculiar made me terrified. I said no, and suddenly he screamed. "Are you sure? It's very large, you know. You might like it." He reached out to give me the pizza, but his other hand was out. It looked like he was ready to grab me or do something horrible to me. I sprinted back to my car and locked the doors instantly. I looked through the side view mirrors, and he was still staring at me. I drove away immediately to my friend's house and stayed the night at his place. We kept looking at the driveway the entire night to see if any red car was patrolling the area, but hopefully we didn't. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I reached out to grab the pizza.